Hello, crime enthusiasts. Are you ready for another chilling investigation? The case of Kimberly Antonakis. Kimberly Antonakis was born in 1974 in New York, USA. She was the only child in her family. Although she grew up in love and wealth, her father, Thomas, founded his own computer company. When Kimberly was young, her parents divorced. Kimberly left to live with her mother, and she still kept in touch with her father. Her father Thomas spent weekends taking Kimberly out and spending all his free time with her. When Kimberly's mother found a new man and decided to move to Florida, she was faced with a difficult choice: to stay with her mother or her father. Since she did not want to leave her familiar environment, Kimberly decided to live with her father Thomas. Kim began living with Thomas. Kimberly grew up to be a well-behaved and sociable child. Over the years, Kimberly became a beautiful and humorous girl. In 1994, Kimberly began attending the College of Staten Island. At that time, she informed her father that she felt she was old enough to live on her own. Kimberly's father, Thomas, was worried about this decision but still praised her and decided not to object. Instead, Thomas promised to ensure that Kimberly had a safe place of her own. Her father Thomas bought an apartment for Kimberly in a wealthy area of the city. He also installed an alarm system for the apartment to ensure Kimberly's safety. To avoid having to park far from home, Thomas bought a parking space in the garage across the street. He also bought Kimberly a cell phone and a pager so they could stay in touch regularly. Kimberly works as an accountant at a company. She lives a normal life like other students, often participating in entertainment activities and parties. Although her father Thomas repeatedly asked her to return to live with him, Kimberly insisted on being independent. In early 1995, Kimberly's best friend Liz Pace's house was being renovated. Liz, along with her boyfriend Joshua Torres and their young son, came to Kimberly's house to ask for temporary accommodation. Out of kindness, Kimberly agreed to let Liz Pace's family stay. One day, Kimberly and Liz decided to go to a party. They got their makeup done, their hair done, and their outfits picked out. Afterwards, they had a great time and danced at the party. When the party was over, Kimberly drove Liz home in her 1994 white Honda Accord. However, Kimberly did not go up to the apartment with Liz because she had unfinished business. The two girls hugged and said goodbye. Liz returned to the apartment first. The next morning, when Kimberly did not show up for work, her co-workers contacted her father, Thomas, to inform him that Kimberly had not shown up for work. Kimberly's absence was unusual because she was always on time. Thomas was also unable to reach his daughter on her cell phone, which made him feel worried and had a bad feeling. Thomas decided to contact Kimberly's friends. However, no one had any information about where she had gone after leaving the party early in the morning of March 1st. When Thomas did not hear from her friends, Thomas decided to go to the police to report the incident. The police thought that Kimberly might have stayed at a friend's house overnight and would return soon, so they advised him to wait at least 24 hours. However, Thomas was not satisfied. He decided to conduct an investigation himself to find Kimberly. After learning of Kimberly's disappearance, Kimberly's mother met with a psychic after being introduced by a friend. Upon seeing Kimberly's photo, the psychic said that she was alive, but very weak and dehydrated. She also said that Kimberly had been kidnapped by acquaintances and that Kimberly had tried to escape several times. She added that the danger came from several people and that one of them had a name that started with the letter J, and that this person was apparently the leader of the gang. Thomas, Kimberly's father, went to the places his daughter frequented and talked to many people, but did not get any important information. Thomas went to Kimberly's apartment and garage to check. When entering Kimberly's apartment, Thomas noticed a bright object lying on the floor near the wall. It turned out to be a small gold earring. Thomas remembered that he had given Kimberly this pair of earrings. Thomas put the earring in his pocket. After checking, Kimberly was not in the apartment either. Thomas only met Kimberly's best friend Liz and her boyfriend Joshua Torres and their 2-year-old child. Thomas knew about Kimberly letting Liz's family stay temporarily. But Thomas did not support this decision. When Thomas talked about Kimberly's situation, Liz's family was surprised and worried about Kimberly's disappearance. Joshua reported that he was looking for Kimberly and volunteered to help. Thomas then went to the police station a second time and insisted that they conduct a search. The police agreed to help him and began an investigation. The police began to investigate the date of Kimberly's disappearance on February 28. It was found that Kimberly went to college in the morning, then went to work. After work, Kimberly went home and had dinner. She then attended a party with Liz and returned home around 4 a.m. Kimberly then went to the parking lot, but the reason she was there at such an early hour is still unclear. Kimberly's bank account was also investigated. The police discovered that Kimberly had last used her bank card the evening before she went missing. The police assumed that Kimberly had been kidnapped. Due to the lack of concrete evidence, the police looked into the information that Kimberly's mother had received from the psychic. Witness interviews were then conducted. The first people interviewed were Liz and Joshua. The police discovered that a total of 65 calls had been made from Kimberly's phone on the morning of March 1st. This surprised the police because of the large number of calls. However, Joshua explained that he had called all of his friends and acquaintances to find out where Kimberly had gone and why she had not stayed home overnight. Joshua said that he considered Kimberly to be like a sister to him. Thanks to Liz's testimony, the police were able to identify the clothes that Kimberly was wearing. A portrait of her has been drawn and will be released to help in the search. In addition, the police have also noticed some distinctive tattoos on Kimberly's body. One of them is a scorpion, which corresponds to her zodiac sign. The other tattoo is located on her waist and represents the infinity sign in the form of 2 naked people parallel to each other. A search for the missing car has been launched. The police have checked all scrap yards and other places where the car could be dismantled for parts or sold. However, this search has not yielded any positive results. The police have advised Thomas to pay attention to letters and phone calls he receives, as it is possible that his daughter's kidnappers will contact Thomas and offer a ransom. At around 2 a.m. on March 4th, the emergency services received a report of a fire. A large abandoned house was on fire at 86 Woodhaven Avenue in Queens. Fire crews were called in to put out the fire. When the fire was finally extinguished, firefighters found a charred body in the basement of the building. Forensic experts revealed that the deceased was a young woman between the ages of 20 and 25. Some of her long black hair was still on her head. There were also traces of tape. The woman's legs were tied tightly, and her hands were tied behind her back. However, the worst part was that she was still alive when the fire broke out, as evidenced by her lungs filled with smoke. In fact, the young woman had been brutally burned alive. Police suspect that the body may be that of Kimberly, who had gone missing. However, dental records need to be examined to confirm the identity. At the same time, experts have also analyzed the ashes to determine the victim's identity. When the autopsy was done, experts found no other traces besides the body. However, they found tattoos that matched the description of the missing woman. Records from the dental clinic also confirmed that this was how Kimberly Antonakis' body was found. A witness to the fire reported that he often walked his dog. However, the pet had been behaving strangely every time it passed the house. After the fire and the discovery of the body, it was discovered what had attracted the dog's attention. Kimberly tried to free herself and call for help. The dog had heard sounds coming from the basement thanks to its sensitive hearing, while humans cannot perceive it. When the police questioned the homeowner, it turned out that he had put the house up for sale and had been monitoring its condition through letters and receipts. However, this man had not checked the basement, only the house from the outside. The police decided to question Joshua again because they still had many unanswered questions about him. Notably, they also noticed an interesting coincidence that his name started with the letter J. This time, Joshua revealed to them about a friend who had not been contacted on the day Kimberly went missing. It was a young Russian man nicknamed Psycho who had a romantic relationship with Kimberly. The police decided to verify the information about this person and learned that Psycho was a Russian citizen who moved to the United States as a child, and that he later joined a gang and repeatedly broke the law. Thus, a suspicious suspect appeared and was soon arrested. During the interrogation, Psycho said that he knew about Kimberly's death. His reaction shocked the police because Psycho insisted that he had nothing to do with the crime, but also showed deep sorrow. It seems he is experiencing real emotions. After investigation, Psycho's alibi was confirmed. Once again, the investigation hit a dead end. Kimberly's family decided to seek help from a psychic once again. This time, the psychic said she saw 4 people involved in the case. She also said that the kidnappers wanted to contact the family but were unable to do so. The abduction initially showed no signs of a tragic ending. Thomas then announced a $10,000 reward for anyone who could provide information leading to the arrest of the perpetrators. Thomas could not forget the psychic's words. He began to think about what she had said about the kidnappers wanting to contact the family. He wondered what that meant and what was stopping them from doing so. When he returned home, Thomas remembered a small detail from the day Kimberly went missing. Thomas had listened to all the answering machine recordings because he hoped Kimberly would contact him. However, there was no voicemail except for 2 blank messages. When he turned them on, he heard nothing, just silence on the other end of the phone. Thomas mistook them for a technical malfunction or a communication problem. 5 days after Kimberly's body was discovered, the police found her car. It was parked in a quiet part of town, near the crime scene. The police hoped to find fingerprints in the car, but unfortunately the car had been washed. The only traces left in the car were a few strands of Kimberly's hair and an earring. During this time, Thomas was implicated in a local mafia hit. Some members of Thomas's crew even blamed him for their daughter's death, as if Thomas's dark actions had caused Kimberly's troubles. However, Thomas denied any involvement. The police investigated this information through their own channels but found no evidence to confirm it. Thomas did not appear to have had anything to do with the incident and continued his business openly. In July 1995, a young man was arrested by police at a New York City home for burglary. However, during questioning, he provided information related to Kimberly's case. The detainee claimed that he had heard from an acquaintance that his friends had kidnapped and then burned the girl alive. When the police learned that the man was Joshua Torres, who lived in Kimberly's apartment and had been involved in the search for her, they decided to take a closer look at Joshua Torres. Joshua was asked to come in for questioning and he denied any involvement in the incident. However, during a lengthy conversation, he made a confession. Joshua said that if he had really been the kidnapper, he would have fed Kimberly. This intrigued the police because there was no information given that Kimberly had died of hunger, thirst, or cold. Only the police knew this information. The police needed more evidence to clear up the case. After investigating, they discovered that Joshua Torres had a criminal record. Furthermore, he had no job and was living off Liz. Meanwhile, Liz worked to support both of them. Joshua took care of the child and had free time to secretly plan the crime. Joshua followed Kimberly and learned her habits, and kidnapped Kimberly and hid her in an abandoned house. But surprisingly, Joshua did not ask for ransom. During the investigation, the calls Joshua made that morning were analyzed. The results showed that Joshua had lied when he said he called Kimberly's friends and acquaintances. But when checked, most of the phone numbers were from random people who had nothing to do with Kimberly. When checking Joshua's pager data, the police discovered that Joshua had sent several strange messages on March 1st. These evidences gradually closed the circle around Joshua Torres. Finally, the police had a solid lead to arrest Joshua. When the police told Joshua that they no longer considered Kimberly's ex-boyfriend a suspect, Joshua changed his story. Joshua said that he suspected his friends of murdering Kimberly. Joshua confessed to assisting in the kidnapping. Joshua said he did not think Joshua's accomplices would decide to kill Kimberly. According to Joshua, they only wanted to demand ransom and release Kimberly, but the plan failed. When the kidnappers could not contact Thomas, even recorded a ransom message. However, for some reason, the recording was not saved on the answering machine. The kidnappers were angry that Thomas did not respond. The kidnappers were scared because the psychic said that the suspect's name began with the letter J. This information was released to the media and broadcast on TV. After speaking with the police, Joshua was released on bail and then disappeared. At the same time, Joshua's accuser, Jose, was shot in the back of the head while he was with his wife. Jose's wife later admitted to the police that her husband did not trust Joshua, used a tape recorder when talking to Joshua, and wanted to expose him. Police were able to establish details of the kidnapping and the crime through pager messages and statements from the suspects. The case involved 4 suspects: Joshua Torres, Julio Negrin, another man named Jose Negrin, and Nicholas Brett. It is worth noting that Julio had dated Kimberly and even intended to marry her. However, Kimberly rejected his proposal. Nicholas had just been released from prison before the kidnapping took place thanks to a bond from his mother. Nicholas had planned the incident while serving a prison sentence for serious crimes. Joshua had a criminal record dating back to his youth, including kidnapping and the legal use of weapons. A kidnapping had taken place, in which Joshua was the mastermind. Joshua directed the actions of the kidnapping group. When Kimberly returned from a party, the group of men attacked her in the parking lot. They had apparently been watching and waiting for Kimberly to be alone. To control Kimberly, they used guns to threaten Kimberly and force her to be quiet. They then tied Kimberly's hands and covered her mouth, eyes, and ears with duct tape. The group then put Kimberly in the trunk of their car and drove her to an abandoned house. There, they took Kimberly into the basement and tied her to a chair. They also took off Kimberly's shoes to prevent her from making noise by tapping her feet. The kidnappers told Kimberly that her father owed money and that they would release her when the money was paid. One of the kidnappers, Julio, was assigned to take care of her, bringing her food and water twice a day and keeping her warm. However, Julio left the house because he was afraid of the consequences. So, for 3 days, Kimberly had no food, no water, and was freezing. Immediately after kidnapping Kimberly, the kidnappers notified Joshua, who then demanded a ransom of $775,000 via an audio message. Joshua then called Thomas and left 2 empty audio messages. Therefore, Thomas ignored these calls. The kidnappers were waiting for a message from Thomas, but they did not understand why Thomas did not contact them. During this time, Kimberly was left alone and fainted several times due to dehydration, but Kimberly still managed to survive. The kidnappers did not receive the ransom and were afraid of being caught, so they decided to release Kimberly. When they went down to the basement, they found Kimberly unconscious. They thought Kimberly was dead and decided to get rid of all the evidence, including the hostage. The police knew that Joshua had directed the actions of his accomplices from inside the house, so Liz did not know that Joshua had kidnapped Kimberly. At the trial, Liz said that after being questioned, Joshua came to her and confessed everything. Joshua then beat her and threatened to kill her before fleeing. Some time after the massacre, the police investigated Jose. He was also suspected of being involved in Kimberly's murder, but there was no direct evidence. Therefore, the police decided to take statements from the kidnappers. When questioning Joshua, he denied all involvement in the case. However, Julio decided to cooperate and gave an honest statement about the incident. Information from Julio allowed Joshua's role in the case to be determined, and Joshua was charged with Kimberly's murder. Therefore, Joshua, Julio and Nicholas were charged with related crimes such as murder, kidnapping and vandalism. At the trial, after more than 10 hours of debate, Joshua was finally sentenced to life in prison for 58 years, the same sentence that Nicholas Brett also received. Julio Negrin was convicted of complicity and sentenced to 2 to 6 years in prison after the incident. Kimberly's father, Thomas, was pleased with the court's decision. Because Thomas did not want criminals to be sentenced to death. In his eyes, the death penalty was not the most severe punishment. Nicholas experienced abuse and assault in prison many times, and after only 2 years of incarceration, Nicholas died of AIDS. Meanwhile, Julio was released after 2 years after completing his sentence. However, Joshua is still serving a longer sentence and cannot be released until 2053 at the earliest, if he is still alive at that time. In 2005, Thomas died of cancer. His family believes that Kimberly's death caused Thomas a lot of stress, and that cancer was part of that. The life of Kimberly Antonakos, a beautiful girl, ended suddenly and tragically. Welcome back, detectives. Let's dive into another horrible case. The case of Joseph Saunier. Joseph Saunier was born in 1955 to a respected family of doctors in Shreveport, Louisiana. From a young age, he aspired to follow in his family's footsteps and become a doctor. With exceptional abilities, Joseph earned a Bachelor of Science in Medical Science from the University of Baton Rouge in 1976. He then applied to Louisiana State University in Shreveport and began working at Parkland Hospital in Dallas, Texas. Joseph effectively balanced his university studies and work. He consistently refined his knowledge through hands-on experience at the hospital. The hospital management recognized Joseph's success and dedication, and in his final year of training, he was appointed chief resident. After completing his studies, Joseph chose to specialize in pathologic anatomy and went on to become a pathologist and laboratory director in Leck, Texas. Joseph's life was marked by personal tragedy, including the loss of the woman he loved, Becky. His 27-year marriage, which he considered happy, ended in divorce when his wife fell in love with another man. Joseph accepted her decision and agreed to the divorce, believing that the woman he loved had found happiness. Joseph had a strong sense of responsibility and nobility. After his divorce from Becky, he maintained a warm relationship with her and continued to support their 2 sons. 2 years later, Becky was killed by her new husband. Joseph was shocked by her death. He often thought about their past family life and mourned her loss. Despite his own grief, Joseph remained a source of strength for his family. He took care of the funeral expenses and helped his sons cope with the trauma. His sons later credited his support for helping them overcome their pain. The tragedy had a profound impact on Joseph. He devoted himself to his work and raising his sons. However, the grief finally gave him the motivation to change his life. He decides to start a new chapter in a new city. In 2007, Joseph moved to Leck, Texas, with his sons, where he became the chief pathologist at Covenant Health System. Feeling the need for a change, Joseph enrolled in a local dance studio. He enjoyed the classes and met new women, which helped fill the void in his life. A few times, Joseph attempted to form connections with his dance partners, but it never worked out. That was until Michelle Tina walked into his dance class on a warm summer evening. Her elegance, poise, sense of humor, and sparkling eyes immediately caught his attention. Her radiant smile illuminated the room, and Joseph knew right then that she was the one he had been searching for. Michelle, too, noticed Joseph's confident and respectful demeanor on the dance floor. As they danced together, the 47-year-old Michelle and 57-year-old Joseph found that they complemented each other perfectly. As they continued to dance together, they grew closer with each passing session. Eventually, Joseph asked Michelle out on a date, and she agreed. This marked the beginning of what seemed like a happy new chapter in both of their lives. Michelle possessed an irresistible charm that had a profound effect on men. Michelle was a classic example of a femme fatale, a woman with an undeniable magnetism that drew attention and sparked passion in those around her. Michelle, like Joseph, is also starting a new life after personal emotional breakdowns. She is running away from the fear and anxiety associated with Mike Dixon, owner of a private clinic for cosmetic surgery. Michelle met Mike in 2008 when she came in for Botox injections. At first, there was just casual social interaction between them, then light flirting followed and they began a romance. Michelle is a successful and free woman. She worked as an executive in the NFL, built a successful career, and didn't lack for anything. Mike, on the other hand, is bound by his marriage. A few months after living a double life, his wife discovered his affair with Michelle and filed for divorce after 20 years of marriage. Mike is so captivated by Michelle that he barely notices that he is losing everything. Mike left his wife for Michelle, even though she never announced she would marry him. When Mike doesn't get the attention he expected, he tries to pressure Michelle, which scares her. Michelle recognized Mike's manipulative behavior and desire to take complete control of her life. This realization caused her to end the relationship. In 2010, Michelle and Mike went their separate ways. However, even after the breakup, Mike continued to pursue Michelle, urging her to return. His obsession exceeds the limit, forcing Michelle to find a way to escape Mike's control. Michelle moved to Lek to start anew, where she met Joseph, a charming and kind-hearted man. They quickly connected, and their relationship blossomed into true love. Joseph's sons and relatives welcomed Michelle with open arms. Joseph spared no expense in giving her gifts, taking her to the most luxurious restaurants and private clubs, and giving her romantic vacations. As Joseph realized he had found his perfect match, he took Michelle to Los Angeles and proposed to her in front of his entire family. Michelle, 47 at the time, was smitten with her new partner and frequently expressed her love for him on social media. However, her ex-lover, Mike Dixon, couldn't help but notice these declarations of love. Mike is furious when he discovers that Michelle has moved away and is planning to marry Joseph. He realized he couldn't win her back but still dared to propose that they rekindle their past relationship, suggesting they become lovers again. Michelle firmly rejected his proposal, refusing to engage in a love triangle, and immediately informed Joseph about Mike's suggestion. After some time, they started to feel like they were being watched. At one point, they even noticed something that looked like a camera flash through the backyard window, but they didn't pay much attention to it, not realizing the seriousness of the problem. The situation got out of control on July 11, 2012, when a gardener came to Joseph's house to discuss a garden renovation project. When the landscaper arrived at the home, he tried to contact Joseph but got no response. He saw an open door and, thinking Joseph might not be able to hear him, went inside. The house was in disarray, and there was a bullet hole near the front door, indicating a possible intruder. The landscaper cautiously went further inside, looking for Joseph. In the garage, he found Joseph lying in a pool of blood on the floor with no signs of life. Joseph's body had stab and gunshot wounds, leading the landscaper to think the perpetrator might be nearby. He immediately left the house and called for help. At 2:48 p.m., the police department received the call and several patrol cars were sent to the scene. When the officers arrived, they found Joseph Sonnier. Medics confirmed that Joseph had died. The incident shocked the public, as it happened in one of the city's safest and most affluent neighborhoods, where crime is extremely rare. Joseph, a respected professional, was known for his calm and kind nature, and it seemed he had no enemies who would want to harm him. Although a window was broken, it was clear that the incident was not a robbery, as nothing was missing from the house. However, a bottle with a hole shot through its bottom was found at the scene, suggesting it was used as a makeshift silencer for a gun. A forensic team arrived soon after to collect evidence, and it appeared that the perpetrator was inexperienced, as they left behind many traces. DNA from the bottle and blood samples were sent to a lab for further analysis. Detectives interviewed neighbors, but none of them reported seeing or hearing anything suspicious. There were no CCTV cameras near the house. According to the investigation, the perpetrator entered through a large window overlooking the backyard, making the attack unexpected. In the dining room, the attacker confronted Joseph and started shooting. It is likely that the wine bottle was used as a silencer at this point. Blood stains in the hallway suggested that Joseph was still alive after being shot. He entered the garage, where the attacker caught up with him and stabbed him multiple times. An autopsy revealed 5 gunshot wounds and 11 stab wounds. The circumstances suggested that the murder was not random, but the identity and motive of the killer remained unknown. The investigation focused on the people closest to the victim. During an interview with law enforcement, the victim's fiancée, Michelle, reported strange things in the months leading up to the murder. She believed Joseph was being stalked. Michelle had seen a stranger lurking outside Joseph's house, watching the door and windows. She also mentioned that Joseph had received persistent calls and texts in the period leading up to his death. Although officers confirmed this information, they initially thought the calls and messages were from other women with whom Joseph was allegedly having relationships, as witnesses claimed he was in contact with multiple women at the time. Investigators questioned Michelle about whether she knew of other women involved with Joseph. Michelle claimed she was unaware of any other women. Joseph's sons also denied the possibility of their father having mistresses, stating that infidelity was not in his character. Despite this, investigators continued to explore a motive of jealousy for the crime. During the subsequent interrogation, Michelle succumbs to the pressure and reveals that she knows several women who may be involved in the crime. According to Michelle, these women are ex-girlfriends who often stalk Joseph. Although he ignored them, they continued to express their displeasure about his upcoming wedding to Michelle. The women in question include a woman from Florida who persisted in contacting Joseph even after he revealed his relationship with Michelle. There was also a nurse, Joseph's colleague, who often called and wrote to him. Additionally, a woman whose daughter sent a letter accusing Joseph of abandoning them shortly before the murder. In the same interview, Michelle mentioned Mike Dixon for the first time. She hadn't thought about Mike spying on her and Joseph before, because Mike stopped paying attention to her after she refused to be his lover. Michelle assumed that Mike had accepted her decision to marry Joseph and move on with his own life. The police visited Mike. He cooperated and spoke with the detectives. Mike revealed that he had been deeply in love with Michelle and had even divorced his wife to pursue a future with her. However, after Michelle rejected him, Mike gave up. He started a new relationship with a younger medical student who corroborated his alibi. At the time of the crime, Mike was at work and then spent time with his new girlfriend, which confirmed he couldn't have been involved. The investigation encountered significant obstacles. Every suspect, including Michelle, had a solid alibi, leaving detectives stumped. They searched for enemies of Joseph or individuals who might benefit financially from his death. But no new leads emerged. Unfortunately, Forensic analysis does not provide any information about an individual, so police cannot identify the owner of the DNA found at the crime scene. Just as the case seemed hopeless, the police received an unexpected call from Paul Reynolds. Reynolds reported that his roommate, David Shepard, had recently confessed to a murder in Leck and then attempted to take his own life but was saved. According to Reynolds, a neighbor shared specific details about David's crimes with him, including details that only a few detectives knew, such as the use of a glass bottle as a silencer. This new information led police to conclude that Shepard was indeed connected to the crime. The witness came forward claiming that David was not the mastermind behind the crime, but rather a person who was hired by an unknown doctor involved in plastic surgery. Police launched an investigation into the new suspect and discovered that Mike Dixon was the person who hired David. When questioned at the police station, David began to confess and revealed that Mike Dixon had indeed hired him to commit the crime. According to David, he and Mike met at a bar while both were going through difficult breakups and formed a friendship. Mike shared his sadness over his lost love, Michelle, who was now engaged to someone else. He claimed that he couldn't move on and was willing to do whatever it took to win her back. David alleged that the initial plan was to discredit Joseph, Michelle's current partner, in the hopes that Michelle would leave him and return to Mike. However, David claimed that murder was not part of the original plan. First, women were paid $1,000 each to pretend to be Joseph's mistresses and pursue him. Additionally, a letter arrived from a woman claiming Joseph had abandoned her and their child. Joseph consistently denied these allegations, and Michelle believed him. It was later revealed that the camera flash seen by the couple was actually the light from David's cell phone flashlight. David had been driving to their house to create the illusion of surveillance. Funded by Mike Dixon, who covered gas and other expenses. When these tactics failed to break the couple apart, Mike plotted a more extreme solution. He offered David 3 silver bars, valued at around $110,000, to kill the pathologist. David agreed and received one of the bars as a deposit, which he immediately sold at a pawn shop. According to David Shepard, the situation escalated out of control when he went to Joseph's house. He claimed the shooting was unintentional, and that after shooting Joseph, he became afraid and Joseph began to run away. David shouted to check on Joseph but received no response. He then followed Joseph into the garage, where he found Joseph lying still and heard his last breath. David rushed to check Joseph's pulse and confirmed that Joseph was dead. David admitted to stabbing Joseph several times but could not remember the exact number. David also admitted that he considered calling for help using Joseph's phone, but ultimately chose not to. Instead, he put the phone back, mutilated Joseph's body, and then went to Mike's house to get the rest of the gold before attempting to take his own life. According to David, he didn't fully understand what he was getting himself into. When he faced Joseph, he realized he could not continue killing. If it weren't for an accidental gunshot, Joseph might still be alive. Mike Dixon was arrested by the police on the same day and charged with first-degree murder. This was based on testimony from David, as well as a large amount of other evidence that included incriminating phone calls and text messages where Mike made explicit confessions. When Mike Dixon was first interviewed by detectives, they had hoped he would confess to the crime. However, he denied everything and asked for a lawyer, which led to a lawsuit. David Sherd, who had been involved in the crime, made a deal with the prosecutor where he pleaded guilty to his role and gave up his right to appeal the sentence. As a result of this deal, David received a life sentence without the possibility of parole, instead of the death penalty. Mike Dixon, on the other hand, maintained that he was not guilty, despite the circumstantial evidence against him. However, in a surprising turn of events, David, who was a key witness for the prosecution, changed his story during the trial. Under oath, David claimed that he had committed the crime alone and that Mike Dixon was not involved. He said that the silver bars found at the scene were meant to be used as an investment in a business that the two of them had planned to start. The jury was unable to reach a unanimous verdict, and a retrial was declared. The second trial occurred in 2016, resulting in Mike's conviction for first-degree murder and a life sentence without parole. However, his lawyers successfully appealed the judgment, and it was overturned. Mike was released on $2 million bail, but the case was far from over. The prosecution sought to reinstate the original sentence through the state's highest criminal court, which would have otherwise led to a third trial. On February 11, 2019, the prosecution's motion was granted, and in April 2020, Mike's bail was revoked, prompting a new arrest warrant. The Texas Court of Criminal Appeals ultimately reversed the lower court's decision, reinstating Mike's life sentence without parole. The judge ordered Mike to continue serving his sentence, and he is currently incarcerated in a Texas prison. Welcome back, detectives. Let's dive into another horrible case, the case of Luz Maria Lopez. Luz Maria Lopez was born on March 17, 1995, in San Cristobal, Verapaz, a small town, to a modest family. She was the youngest of two children. Her parents, Al Morales and Brian, raised her along with her older brother, Omar. Luz Maria's early life was marked by a serious health scare. As an infant, she nearly died due to an intestinal obstruction and underwent a complex surgery. Although her doctors were uncertain about her chances of recovery, her mother's prayers and faith played a significant role in Luz Maria's survival. Fortunately, the surgery did not affect Luz Maria's development. She grew up to be a healthy and active child. During her school years, Luz Maria was a sporty. She was actively involved in gymnastics, athletics, and classical dance. She easily makes friends with everyone and got along with people from different backgrounds. Luz Maria excelled academically, particularly in the humanities. After completing her secondary education, Luz Maria decided to pursue higher education at a prestigious state university. She chose to study law and later specialized in criminalistics, a field that had always fascinated her. A fateful encounter took place when Luz Maria accompanied her mother to a car dealership in Coban, the capital of Alta Verapaz. The occasion was her older brother's 25th birthday, and the family wanted to surprise him with a motorcycle he had always desired. Inside the dealership, they were warmly greeted by a courteous and attentive young sales consultant named Jorge, who showcased the available models, offering some advice. Although Luz Maria and her mother have already chosen a model, but they want to consider and discuss it with her father before making a decision to buy it. As they left, they took a business card from the dealership and Luz Maria left her phone number for further communication. Shortly after, she received a call from Jorge himself, but instead of discussing the potential purchase, the conversation turned to a more personal subject. Over the following days, Jorge contacted Luz Maria several times, gradually building up the courage to invite her to meet at a coffee shop. Jorge was clearly smitten with Luz Maria, the beautiful, sultry brunette, but he didn't know how to approach her. Luckily, Luz Maria also liked Jorge, and when he asked to meet, she happily agreed. Although Luz Maria was a year younger, their small age difference wasn't an issue. They fell deeply in love, both believing it was love at first sight, and that a long, happy life was ahead. A few short months into their relationship, they decided to live together, despite parental objections. They had a small, private wedding, attended only by close friends and family. However, their special day almost got derailed due to a mishap at the banquet venue. They had to cough up extra cash to save the celebration, which wedding ultimately took place on schedule. Jorge was born in 1996 in Santa Catalina Latina, a town in central Guatemala. Jorge and his younger brother, Pablo, grew up in a low-income household. His family struggled financially, so as children, They did not have the luxury of fine clothes and expensive toys, as the family's limited income only covered the most basic needs. Even though Jorge grew up in difficult circumstances, he seemed to have no motivation to change his life for the better. He lived life at his own pace, choosing to enjoy simple pleasures rather than strive for advanced degrees or job security. Those who knew Jorge described him as introverted, unsociable, and having few close relationships, especially with women. When he met the love of his life, Luz Maria, he went all out to win her heart and quickly proposed, fearing she might change her mind. However, Luz Maria's parents, Al Morales and Brian, were suspicious of him from the start. They couldn't quite put their finger on what it was about him that they didn't like, but they couldn't convince their daughter to call off the wedding. The marriage turned out to be unhappy. After the wedding, Luz Maria became pregnant, but she had not yet finished her university degree and struggled to find a good job. Due to her lack of experience and health issues, she had to accept short-term, low-skilled jobs. Meanwhile, her husband lost his job and was in no hurry to find a new one. When their daughter, Alice, was born, the family's financial situation became more difficult. Both spouses were unemployed, and they had no money to pay rent, buy food, or pay for the family's basic needs. Jorge convinced Luz Maria that their only option was to temporarily move in with his parents. Luz Maria was initially hesitant, but facing no alternative and having a baby to care for, she eventually gave her consent. Luz Maria's mother was aware of the problems her daughter was facing in her marriage, but despite mother concerns, Luz Maria was optimistic that things would improve. Luz Maria assured her mother that everything would get better soon, so her mother decided to visit her and see how she was doing. However, when she went to Luz Maria's husband's house to see her daughter, she was shocked by what she found. Luz Maria was in a terrible state, eating only once a day and very little at that. This was partly due to Jorge's family not providing her with enough food, even though she was unemployed and breastfeeding her young daughter. The lack of food was only one of many problems Luz Maria faced in her in-laws' home. She was constantly belittled and even physically abused by her husband's younger brother. He was annoyed by the sound of the baby crying and the presence of children's belongings in the house. On several occasions, he threw items at Luz Maria, including a baby bottle that hit her and her daughter, Alice, who was in her arms. Despite witnessing these events, Jorge just stood by and did nothing to protect his wife and children, he treating them as if they were strangers. Al Morales convinces her daughter to take her granddaughter to her maternal home. Jorge arrived shortly afterwards, asking his wife to return home and promising to find a job. Luz Maria agreed, on the condition that they could rent their own apartment and live separately from Jorge's parents. After completing her education and defending her diploma, Luz Maria landed her dream job at the city prosecutor's office. As a smart, talented, and responsible young woman, she quickly earned the respect of her colleagues and began to advance in her career. As time passed, the family's financial situation significantly improved, thanks to Luz Maria's hard work and success. They were eventually able to afford a car. Meanwhile, Jorge continued to struggle with his own life, failing to find direction and instead relying on his wife's income. His laziness and jealousy intensified over time, causing tension in the household. Jorge had a volatile temper, and the situation worsened with time. Jorge was a man who preferred a life of leisure, spending most of his time at home watching TV, drinking beer with friends, and relying on his wife's income. He was extremely possessive and controlling, restricting his wife's freedom and autonomy. He wouldn't allow her to make friends, have lunch with colleagues, or even be alone without him. He constantly monitored her phone activity, checked her call history, and read her messages. He also forbade her from creating social media accounts. When they were alone at home, Jorge's behavior was just as bad. He frequently arguments, blamed his wife for all their problems, and never took responsibility for his actions. When they lived with his parents, Jorge failed to stand up for his wife, instead watching as she was humiliated, insulted, and even physically abused by his relatives. Jorge frequently resorted to physical violence in their relationship. He had a controlling attitude towards his wife, Luz Maria, and wrongly believed she would accept his abusive treatment. Their neighbors frequently heard screams coming from their house and witnessed signs of physical abuse on Luz Maria's face and body. Luz Maria had tried to leave her husband multiple times, taking their daughter and moving in with her parents. However, her husband would always show up, beg for forgiveness on his knees, and promise to change. Despite her parents' warnings to leave him, Luz Maria would forgive her husband and give him another chance. On December 15, 2020, after another violent argument, Luz Maria took their 3-year-old daughter, Alice, fled to her mother's house in tears. The next day, Jorge arrived, but it was unclear whether he was seeking reconciliation with his wife or just wanted his car back. He claimed to have found a new job and promised that their lives would improve, swearing that he would never physically harm Luz Maria again. Luz Maria believed him once more and returned to their rented apartment with her husband. In January 2021, Jorge failed to get a job as promised and stole the money Luz Maria had earned, leaving their family with nothing. Luz Maria called her mother to complain, and her mother agreed to meet with her to give her some money until she received her next salary. However, on January 19th, Luz Maria failed to show up and was unreachable by phone, which was unusual for her. Concerned for her daughter's well-being, Morales went to Luz Maria's workplace the next day and found that she had not shown up for 2 consecutive days and had not been in contact with anyone. Around the same time, Jorge was also looking for Luz Maria. He went to the prosecutor's office claiming they had a fight and assuming she had gone to her mother's house. However, Morales suspected that he was lying and immediately went to the police to report Luz Maria missing. That same day, a nationwide alert system was launched under the codename Isabel Claudina. This system was originally designed to facilitate urgent searches for missing young women. When the massive search began, her husband, Jorge, was immediately identified as the lead suspect. In fact, he was the only suspect. Luz Maria had no enemies, and there was no reason to believe she had been kidnapped. The last person to see her alive was Jorge himself. Jorge denied any involvement in Luz Maria's disappearance, claiming he had been searching for her and was outraged to be considered a suspect. Jorge's story had several holes in it, and he couldn't give a clear reason for not telling the police about his wife's disappearance on the same day it happened. If Jorge thought Luz Maria was at her mother's house, it wasn't clear why he didn't call or visit her there. On January 22nd, municipal workers stumbled upon the body of Luz Maria Lopez while responding to a clogged storm drain near the road. When they lifted the grate, they found a large plastic bag containing charred human remains. The workers immediately reported the discovery to the police, suspected that the body might be that of Luz Maria. Forensic experts confirmed that the remains belonged to she, and Luz Maria's parents and brother identified the body despite its severe disfigurement from fire. Notably, the body was found on the same street as the prosecutor's office where Luz Maria worked. Despite the body's severe burns, pathologists determined that Luz Maria had been severely beaten and died from asphyxia. Evidence of internal hemorrhages, fractures sustained while she was still alive, and caked blood in her nose and mouth supported this conclusion. Deep marks on her neck also indicated strangulation. At the time of the discovery of the body, no new suspects had emerged. Luz Maria's parents were convinced that their son-in-law, Jorge, was responsible for the brutal murder of their daughter. As a result, Jorge was immediately taken into custody, and investigators began to look into the motive behind the crime. Experts in psychology and criminal behavior were consulted to examine the relationships within the family and the marriage. During the investigation, Luz Maria's mother, Morales, provided an audio recording that had been sent to her anonymously by a neighbor who had witnessed their frequent arguments. The recording captured a heated argument between they, in which Luz Maria frantically screams and cries for help, accompanied by the faint sounds of a child crying in the background. Morales was deeply shocked and extremely upset by the news. She emphasized that if the witness had immediately contacted the police, her daughter might still be alive. The witness did not call the police or even visit the house where the screams originated. The police were unable to locate the anonymous person, which meant they could not be officially involved in the investigation. During an interview, Morales urged citizens to be vigilant and report instances of domestic violence to the police rather than simply documenting them. She believed that such actions could help save lives. The crime sparked widespread outrage, prompting thousands of people to take to the streets and demand justice for Luz Maria. Jorge was taken into custody, but he continued to deny his involvement, claiming he had driven his wife to work on the day she disappeared. Security footage did show their car heading in the direction of her workplace, but the tinted windows made it impossible to determine how many people were inside. Additionally, no footage showed the car stopping or Luz Maria getting out. At the house they was renting, police discovered evidence of a violent incident. There were faint blood stains and drag marks, suggesting that this was where the brutal attack had occurred. Further evidence was discovered in the trunk of the family car, where microscopic fragments of burnt human flesh were found. The investigators also became interested in a recent purchase made by a double orthopedic mattress. Specifically, they were interested in the dense polyethylene wrapping that came with the mattress. A comparative analysis revealed that Jorge had used this wrapping to package the burnt remains of Luz Maria. Additionally, several neighbors came forward as witnesses, reporting that they had frequently heard Jorge yelling at his wife and threatening to kill her. Just days before Luz Maria's disappearance, Jorge had been overheard shouting that he would kill her if she tried to leave him, and that he would hide her body so well that no one would ever find it. Criminologists use collected data and witness testimony to reconstruct the events surrounding the crime. On the night of January 19, 2021, a brutal murder took place. The day before, Luz Maria and her husband, Jorge, had a violent argument. Jorge physically assaulted her. On this occasion, his rage escalated, causing him to strike his wife multiple times. Her screams for help were heard by the neighbors, but they failed to report the incident to the authorities. The beating left Luz Maria with a broken nose and a head injury. Jorge then strangled her with his bare hands. In an attempt to dispose of the body, he dragged it to the backyard, doused it with flammable liquid, and set it on fire. However, the fire produced a significant amount of smoke and a strong odor, which Jorge feared would attract the attention of the neighbors. He quickly extinguished the flames, wrapped the charred remains in plastic, and sought a secluded location to hide the body, he believing it would never be discovered. Jorge committed a heinous crime in front of his 3.5-year-old daughter, who was old enough to partially understand what was happening. The child witnessed the beating and crime, and her cries and screams were recorded. Despite this, Jorge attempted to cover his tracks by using his knowledge of forensics, gained from his wife's textbooks, to create an alibi. He disposed of her body in a drainage sewer on a poorly lit road with no surveillance cameras. The next morning, Jorge drove to his wife's workplace, pretending to have taken her there as usual. He then began a fake search for her, contacting her colleagues, friends, and family. During the trial, Jorge's lawyers delayed proceedings and attempted to mislead the investigation. They claimed that all the evidence and witness statements were indirect and did not directly prove Jorge's guilt. Defense attorneys requested that Jorge's detention be changed to house arrest, arguing that he was deeply depressed due to the accusations of killing Luz Maria he loved and the mother of his child. However, the the crucial evidence came from Luz Maria's phone, which was in Jorge's possession. On the day after the crime, he sent multiple messages from her phone to different people, attempting to make people believe that Luz Maria was still alive. An analysis of the phone's movements revealed that it was consistently in the same locations as Jorge's phone. The defense team attempted to spin this evidence in their favor, claiming that Jorge had found his wife's phone and was driving around the city with it while searching for her. However, they failed to explain why Jorge was sending messages from her phone. Furthermore, bruises and scratches on Jorge's body, which were documented by experts through photographs, suggested that Luz Maria had put up a struggle. The most noticeable injury on Jorge was a scratch on his neck. However, investigators were unable to find Jorge's skin cells under Luz Maria's fingernails. Despite several questionable points in the case, the prosecutor pushed for the maximum possible sentence. The defendant was found guilty of brutally murdering his wife in October 2022. Jorge was sentenced to 50 years in prison, despite maintaining his innocence. Custody of their young daughter, Alice, was awarded to her maternal grandparents. The grandparents expressed that their granddaughter had given their lives new meaning. Welcome back, detectives. Let's dive into another horrible case, the case of Brett Ryan. Brett Ryan grew up in Canada, in a large family with his parents, Bill and Susan. Bill works at the Toronto Star Daily newspaper and spends time on his many interests, including sports, yoga, and psychology, which help balance family life. In addition, his wife, Susan, is able to manage the household, take care of the children, and keep their Toronto home clean. Passers-by often stop to admire the family's beautiful and blooming garden. Although Susan loved her sons equally, but Brett seemed to be less criticized because he was generally well-behaved. Brett was very clever at getting out of difficult situations, which gave the impression that he was a good boy, although this was not always the case. Brett was extremely popular in school, with everyone wanting to be his friend or at least be able to greet him by name, just like his older brothers. After high school, Brett attended university, driven by a desire to surpass his brother's achievements. To earn extra money, he placed an ad in the local newspaper, offering to paint houses and fences for Toronto residents. At first, his business was quite successful and Brett felt proud, especially with his first income. His mother, Susan, was thrilled and often cited him as a role model for others. However, things took a turn when Brett dropped out of college to focus full-time on his paint business. Without a degree, he had to work full-time as a paint salesman, which deprived him of formal education and exposed him to paint fumes on a regular basis. For a while, Brett felt confident and superior to his brothers, but this soon changed. After a couple of years, his brothers, Christopher and Leland, graduated and landed jobs in their specialized fields. Christopher worked for the Toronto Transit Commission, and Leland became the family artist and designer. As they established their careers and moved out of their parents' home, Brett's power began to diminish significantly. To save money on rent, Brett continued to live with his parents and younger brother, who attended a school for gifted children. Brett's financial situation grew more dire over time. By 2007, when he turned 26, his debt had surged to more than $60,000. This burden led to depression, but despite his inner turmoil, Brett maintained a cheerful exterior, always willing to lend a helping hand and participate in volunteer work. His friends and acquaintances were unaware of the immense emotional pain he was hiding. Brett faced a severe situation on October 28, 2007. With winter approaching, he had no orders. Left with no other choice, Brett wore his oldest clothes, including a hat, a long sweater his brother had given him, and a long scarf his mother had knitted. It was the first time he had worn the scarf, but it was finally coming in handy. He wrapped it around his face, leaving only a narrow slit for his eyes, and headed for the bank that was on the outskirts of his neighborhood. Brett stood in line at the bank, holding a thick folder and favoring his right foot as he waited his turn. When the bank employee called him forward, he approached her and spoke in a hushed tone. He calmly informed her that he had a gun and urged her to remove all the cash from the register and hand it over to him. He warned her that if she didn't comply, he would start shooting, and she would be the first person he would harm. She with trembling hands handed him all the cash from the register. Brett quietly exited the building, careful not to draw the attention of the guardians. Once outside, Brett took off running. He counted the money he had stolen from the bank, but it wasn't much, just over $1,000. To pay off his debt, he calculated that he would need to rob about 60 more banks, a crazy idea, but to him it seemed like the only option. For the first few days, Brett was fearful that the police would somehow catch up with him, so he avoided going home. He told his mother he had a job in a neighboring town and spent his nights sleeping in his car. Periodically, Brett would sneak back to his house to check if there were any police cars staking out the area. Finding none, he felt reassured that he was in the clear. The first robbery was followed by a second, then a third, and a fourth. Each time, Brett changed his clothes, opting for second-hand or discarded items he found in the trash. He would burn the used clothes after each crime. Brett also bought a beard from a costume party store to further disguise himself. Brett committed a string of bank robberies in the Toronto area, and his distinctive beard made a lasting impression on the witnesses. His total intended theft across all instances never exceeded $3,000. Brett's luck ran out when police spotted his car on surveillance cameras and followed him home. They tracked his exact route, gathering details from various vehicles to prove his guilt. Further inquiries yielded little new information, so the authorities closely tracked a particular road in an attempt to shed light on the case. Their patience and hard work finally paid off. They found a potential lead. This person of interest, a bearded man, was found walking alone near a bank and was promptly detained by the officer for further investigation. Brett was under investigation for 7 months before being charged with robbery with a firearm, despite having a gun permit. Notably, he never actually carried a gun or any other weapon during the robberies. He didn't even bring a kitchen knife. Initially, he was charged with 19 counts, but after multiple appeals filed by him and his family, only 8 of those counts were upheld. Upon being given the opportunity to apply for parole, Brett submitted a petition. In it, he asked the authorities to consider the circumstances that led him to commit the crimes, including severe depression caused by 2 failed relationships and a significant amount of debt. He also reiterated that he had never intended to harm anyone during the robberies, as evidenced by his lack of weapons. His remarks were taken into account, but as a condition of his potential parole, he was required to undergo a session with a psychologist. The sessions had a positive impact on Brett. During his time in prison, he had lost touch with his family, but he took the initiative to reconnect with them. The positive changes in Brett were noticed by the commissioners, and on November 24, 2010, he was released from prison. However, the freedom he had fought so hard for turned out to be more challenging than he had anticipated. Prior to his career as a painter, Brett struggled with deep emotional pain that weighed heavily on him. He had previously been a bank robber and served time in prison, which damaged his reputation. As a result, no company would hire him, and even those who initially hired him for house painting services would cancel once they discovered his true identity. The neighbors, who once admired Susan's garden and visited frequently, now spread unpleasant rumors about the family. The Brett family quickly sold their house and relocated to Scarborough. Susan started a new garden, and Brett found a job with a trading company. Although the pay was low, his parents helped him financially to rebuild his life and continue his university education. Brett continued to see a psychologist, who consistently advised him to maintain a strong connection with his family. Brett's life took a turn for the better when he met Kristen Baxter in September 2011. Kristen was an amazing person who had her own apartment with a stunning sea view. She was also into sports, which helped her stay in shape. What Brett appreciated most about her was that she didn't care about his past. They enjoyed traveling together, including a trip to Australia. Brett's parents were thrilled to see their son in a happy relationship and were confident that Kristen would encourage him to reach his full potential. However, just when everything was going well, tragedy struck. Brett's father passed away, leaving him in shock and sending him into a depressive state. As a result, Brett started visiting his psychologist more frequently to cope with his emotions. Brett was juggling two responsibilities: supporting his mother financially and nurturing his relationship with Kristen. They were both young adults, eager to build a stronger and more significant relationship with each other. Brett fell deeply in love with Kristen and decided to carry out an important plan. He had some savings and, after discussing his plans with his mother, decided to propose to Kristen with a ring. His mother supported his decision and gave him money to buy a ring. Although Kristen didn't need an expensive gift, Brett chose a gold ring with a large diamond to make the proposal special. Kristen happily accepted his proposal. As they began planning their wedding, Brett agreed with Kristen's decisions, but he was worried about the high costs and how they would affect his job. Brett found a job opening at a large technology company on the internet and applied for it. He updated his resume and submitted it, and was even invited for an interview, which he successfully passed. As a result, he was offered the job and was thrilled. He eagerly shared the news with his fiancée and mother, and asked them for money to buy an expensive suit for work. His mother agreed to help him, and he purchased the suit. However, just as Brett was about to start his new job, the company called him to inform him that they had to withdraw their offer. The security department had discovered his past criminal record, and the company could no longer hire him. This news was devastating for Brett, and his mood plummeted. He felt like giving up on his job search and education, wondering why he was wasting his time applying for jobs that he would never get due to his past mistakes. He decided that it would be better to use the money his mother and brothers had given him for something else. Brett had dropped out of university, but he didn't tell his family or his counselor. To maintain the illusion of success, Brett would wear a suit and tie, then change into casual clothes on the way to his job as a house painter. He would tell his relatives that he worked in an office. To further deceive his loved ones, Brett would post fake photos on social media, pretending to be at work or attending business events. He would also fake phone calls, making it seem like he was busy with work-related issues. Brett's family had no idea that he was hiding the truth about his life. As Brett's wedding to Kristen approached in September 2016, his deception reached new heights. He rented an expensive restaurant for the reception, which cost $100 per guest. His family was thrilled, believing that Brett had finally turned his life around with a prestigious job and a beautiful fiancée. However, Brett's deceptions became so overwhelming that he could no longer control his lies. Brett's wedding was just a month away, and he was struggling to cover the costs. He had been borrowing money from his mother, but when she could no longer help him, he pressured her to find a higher-paying job. Meanwhile, he was planning a bachelor party and had invited all his friends and brothers. Brett had a secret. He had been lying to his family for a year about working as an engineer for a technology company. When he finally confessed to his counselor, the counselor advised him to come clean to his mother. After much procrastination, Brett told his mother the truth, which devastated her. She bragged to everyone about her son's success. Brett's mother demanded that he tell his fiancée, Kristen, the truth, threatening to do so herself if he didn't. She also warned him that his brothers were aware of the situation and were on her side. However, Brett couldn't bring himself to confess to Kristen, despite knowing that the wedding was unlikely to happen due to his deception. With less than a month to go before the wedding, Brett remained silent, knowing that Kristen deserved to know the truth before it was too late. Brett was anxious about his mother revealing a potentially scandalous secret to his fiancée, Kristen. Every time her phone rang, he would tense up, holding his breath until he realized it wasn't his mother on the line, but rather one of Kristen's friends inquiring about her wedding plans. Eventually, Brett came up with a plan to silence his mother for good. As a convicted felon, Brett was prohibited from owning firearms. He decided to use a crossbow, a silent and deadly weapon, to carry out his plan. Interestingly, his late father had taught him how to shoot a crossbow at targets in their garden, a hobby that Brett had excelled at. Brett purchased the crossbow and arrows at a local sporting goods store and hid them in his garage, disguising them among construction debris. He also created a fake alibi by rigging his computer to automatically post pre-written comments on YouTube. He achieved this by attaching a spoon to a fan, which was connected to his computer. The fan was set to a timer, making it seem like Brett was actively using his computer at the time of the crime. Brett made everyone believe that he spent the whole day at home, watching videos and commenting on them. However, on the morning of August 25th, he had other plans. He put on disguising clothes that concealed his face, sneaked out of the house through the back door to avoid the security cameras, and took a train to his parents' house. He wants to eliminate anyone who might stand in the way of the peaceful life he and Kristen are building. When Brett arrived at his parents' house, his mother, Susan, was taken aback by his unexpected visit. She wasn't feeling well that day, but Brett persisted in persuading her not to reveal his plans to his future wife. Despite her poor health, Susan firmly refused to comply with Brett's demands. As he continued to pressure her, Brett's anger escalated, and Susan sensed that something was terribly wrong. She noticed the crazed look in her son's eyes and warned him that she had already called for help and that Christopher was on his way. Brett's anger reached a boiling point. He rushed to the garage, grabbed a crossbow, but his rage and adrenaline surge made him unable to aim properly. Instead, he used the crossbow's butt to bludgeon his mother. To ensure she was dead, he tightened a rope around her neck. After covering her body with plastic bags, Brett loaded the crossbow with arrows, ready to face whoever was coming next. Brett's brother Christopher was lured into a trap by the suspect. As he entered the garage or the yard, Brett, who was hiding in the bushes, ambushed and shot Christopher in the neck. Christopher died shortly after the attack. Alexander, the youngest brother, was the next target. The suspect had also managed to lure him, but Alexander's outcome was different. Shot in the neck with an arrow, Alexander was critically injured but didn't die instantly. He screamed and cried for help as the attack took place. Throughout this violence, Leland remained asleep on the second floor, oblivious to the crime happening nearby and to the identity of the perpetrator, who was also a family member. It was Alexander's screams that startled Leland out of sleep, ran downstairs, and stumbled upon the horrific scene of his brother Brett trying to strangle Alexander. A fight broke out between Leland and Brett, and Leland ended up in control, forcing Brett to back down. Leland immediately fled to a neighbor's house and called the police. With no means of escape, Brett remained in the house, realizing too late that his actions had disastrous consequences. In a desperate attempt to make amends, he composed a text message to Kristen, pleading for her forgiveness. Upon arriving at the scene, police officers found Brett, covered in blood, sitting beside his critically injured brother Alexander, who would later succumb to his injuries in the hospital. Brett voluntarily surrendered to the authorities, requesting to be handcuffed and taken into custody. During his confession, he revealed the location of his mother's body, hidden beneath packages in the garage, and acknowledged that she was beyond help. Brett admitted at the police station during the trial that he had not intended to kill Susan, but rather to scare her. In contrast, he had planned to kill Christopher and Alexander. who were witnesses to the crime. If they had not been present, they would still be alive. Brett attempted to justify his actions by citing his struggles with depression, but this did not lead to a more lenient sentence. Despite Brett's cooperation with the investigation and his voluntary confession, the judge imposed 3 life sentences, 1 for each murder. Brett will be eligible for parole in 2041. Leland, the sole survivor of the incident, has refused to speak to reporters, but he is well known in Toronto as the one who narrowly escaped the carnage. Detectives. Let's dive into another horrible case, the case of Fusako Sano. Nobuyuki was born on July 15, 1962, in the Japanese prefecture of Niigata. He grew up in a wealthy family. His family's business, related to passenger transportation, was very successful, thanks to his 62-year-old father. Nobuyuki was a late child, with 5 half-siblings from his father's previous marriage. However, he is not really close to them. As a result, he grew up to be a spoiled and demanding child who always expected to get his own way, immediately. Nobuyuki often becomes aggressive when his expectations are not met in a timely manner. One notable incident occurred. He threw a tantrum in a store, punching his mother when she refused to buy him another toy. Nobuyuki struggled to form relationships with his peers due to his complicated and sometimes unusual behavior. He was also self-conscious about his height, which often caused him to hunch over. This behavior caused his classmates to tease him and give him unflattering nicknames. Despite this, Nobuyuki's family resided in a luxurious 2-story European-style house, which featured a spacious room specifically designed for him. The boy was uncomfortable in the room, fidgeting and expressing fear of being alone. This behavior led his parents to take him to see a doctor. After an initial review, he was referred to a psychiatrist who diagnosed him with multiple disorders, a fear of the dark, a fear of germs and dirt, and a unique of autophobia, fear of loneliness, sociophobia, anxiety related to social interactions. Essentially, he feared both being alone and being around others. As a result, he became a loner in high school, never forming close relationships with classmates, and never having a girlfriend despite his attractive appearance. His peers avoided him, and he became an outcast. The only people he felt comfortable expressing his anger and frustration to were his elderly parents, who forgave him and tried to calm him down with gifts and money. As an adult, he struggled to hold down a job. He frequently got into conflicts with colleagues, neglected his responsibilities, and would often leave work in the middle of the day for no good reason, such as when it was raining and he felt sad. On one occasion, he intentionally hurt a female coworker, likely trying to get her attention out of sympathy. Although the incident was attributed to an accident, he was fired immediately. After being fired, Nobuyuki became unemployed and relied on his parents' financial support. Over time, he became increasingly reclusive, rarely leaving his room, and frequently clashed with his parents. Following a particularly intense quarrel, Nobuyuki started a fire in his home, nearly destroying the house and putting its occupants in harm's way. Nobuyuki was later admitted to a psychiatric clinic for treatment, where he was diagnosed with a depressive disorder, uncontrollable outbursts of aggression, and signs of misogyny, extreme dislike and hatred of women. After a little over a month of treatment, he was discharged, deemed not to pose an immediate threat to others. For a brief period, Nobuyuki remained calm and even began rebuilding the partially burned house, adding a couple of new rooms. However, his efforts were short-lived, and he eventually abandoned the construction project. Nobuyuki became increasingly withdrawn and isolated. He spent most of his time in his room, watching TV. He not only forbade his parents from entering his room, but also the second floor of the house. If they tried to cross this boundary, he would violently lash out at them, punching and threatening to kill them. In the spring of 1989, Nobuyuki began taking walks, but he preferred to stroll near a local school where he could secretly watch the female students. At first, he kept his distance and tried not to communicate with anyone. However, one day, he suddenly grabbed a young girl, who was only 9 years old, and threw her over his shoulder as she was leaving the school gate. He then ran to his car, which was parked nearby. The other children immediately screamed for help, and a school security guard and bystanders quickly intervened, rescuing Shi and detaining Nobuyuki until the police arrived. Nobuyuki was unable to explain why he attacked Shi, and it was clear that he had intended to commit a violent and unlawful act against a minor. As a result, he was charged with attempting to commit a violent crime against a child. Nobuyuki Sato avoided a long prison sentence thanks to his father's connections and wealth. In August, Nobuyuki was given a year's probation despite his heinous crime. Shortly thereafter, his name was mysteriously removed from the criminal prosecution database, allegedly due to his father's intervention. However, Nobuyuki's father died shortly after his son's case, dying of a heart attack. Nobuyuki was left with overwhelming shame and guilt for his father's sacrifices and efforts to cover up his crime. After the failure of his first kidnapping attempt, Nobuyuki, 28 years old, tried again a year and a half later. This time, he carefully planned the crime and remained under the police radar for an extended period. On November 13, 1990, Nobuyuki set out on a hunting trip around the city. In the evening, as darkness fell, he spotted 9-year-old Fusako Sano, who had stayed late after school due to a sports event, walking alone on a deserted road. Nobuyuki quickly pulled over in front of her, got out of the car with a knife, and grabbed Fusako. He threatened to slit her throat if she tried to scream or run away. Then, he forced her into the trunk of the car. After driving for a while, he turned into a vacant lot, where he tied Fusako's hands and feet and covered her mouth with tape. When night fell, Nobuyuki drove to his house and took Fusako out of the trunk. Nobuyuki led her through a part of the house that was still under construction to his room, trying not to be seen. He then left the room and re-entered through the front door, as if everything was normal. Once upstairs, Nobuyuki again threatened Fusako with the knife, ordering her to be quiet. He tied her to the bed and warned her that if she tried to leave the room, look out the window, scream, or cry, he would kill her and dispose of her body in the ocean, where no one would ever find it. Fusako was terrified and obeyed the kidnapper's orders, hoping that he would eventually take pity on her and let her go. When Fusako didn't return home from school, her parents started to worry. They knew she had stayed late to watch a baseball game, but as the sun began to set, they expected her to be home by then. Initially, Fusako's parents tried to find their daughter on their own, retracing her usual route from school to home, but their efforts were unsuccessful. As night drew closer, the parents of Fusako turned to the police for help, hoping for a quick resolution. Since Fusako's disappearance, only a few hours had passed, and they were anxious to find her. The police launched a search operation. And by the next morning, they were joined by dozens of volunteers from the local community. The following day, the search party grew to over 200 people, who combed the area, distributed flyers with Fusako's photo, and interviewed passers-by in search of witnesses. Notably, Nobuyuki lived close to Fusako's school and the police station. He had previously attempted to kidnap Fusako, which had brought him to the attention of the police. However, despite this, Nobuyuki was not considered a suspect in the case, thanks to the efforts of his late father. A large-scale search operation was initiated to locate Fusako Sano, a Japanese schoolgirl who had disappeared. The search lasted for many months, covering numerous locations such as empty buildings, houses, railroad cars, and vacant lots. Investigators also searched suspicious vehicles and combed through interstate highways, but found no clues. As the investigation continued, authorities considered various theories, including the possibility of involvement by North Korean special services. However, despite their efforts, the search was unsuccessful and Fusako remained missing. Fusako later revealed that she was terrified during her captivity and followed Nobuyuki's instructions in the hope that he would eventually release her. However, her captor, Nobuyuki, had no intention of letting her go. For several months, he kept her bound with tight restraints that impaired her blood flow and caused her to lose sensation in her limbs. If she disobeyed or made a sound, he would punish her with a stun gun, beat her, or threaten her with a knife. Notably, Nobuyuki never assaulted Fusako in a sexual manner during her captivity. Instead, he treated her more like a possession or a pet, using her as a means of companionship and conversation. Nobuyuki kept Fusako captive, feeding her a meager diet of food prepared by his mother. As a result, Fusako became severely malnourished and weakened. He restricted her to her bed, forcing her to use plastic bags as a toilet, which he would then dispose of in an unfinished part of the house. Once a month, he would bathe her in a basin, cut her hair and nails, and dress her in his own worn-out clothes. Despite her compliance, Nobuyuki would regularly beat her for his own amusement. Over time, Fusako's spirit was broken, and she became submissive, no longer attempting to escape or even look out the window. As the years passed, Nobuyuki stopped bothering to physically restrain Fusako, and didn't even think to lock the door when he stepped out. He would simply cover her with blankets or towels. Occasionally, he would turn on the radio or watch TV with her, but only to programs that interested him, such as Scottish or sports matches. He also brought her comic books, which he enjoyed himself. These were the only things Fusako had to read during her confinement. For nearly a decade, Fusako was isolated, never speaking to anyone else or leaving her room. She remained in bed most of the time, hardly moving or trying to resist her situation. Fusako had become so resigned to her fate that she no longer attempted to escape or call for help. Nobuyuki's mother lived in fear of her son's violence. For years, she had avoided the second-floor room because Nobuyuki had threatened her with violence. This was not an idle warning, as Nobuyuki actually pushed her down the stairs when she tried to enter the room. She retired in 1996 at the age of 73, and her circumstances became extremely difficult. Nobuyuki regularly abused her, forcing her to follow his rules. Desperate for help, she went to the police in the spring of 1996 and filed a report, stating that she was a victim of domestic violence at the hands of her son. However, the police seemed reluctant to intervene and persuaded her to withdraw her statement, advising her to handle the situation on her own. She also sought help from a public health center, complaining about her son's aggressive behavior and requesting that he be hospitalized for psychiatric evaluation. Her concerns were ignored and she was told her son's actions were not worth worrying about. Instead, she was advised to encourage him to seek help voluntarily. In January 2000, the elderly woman, exhausted from years of physical and emotional abuse, made a desperate call for help. She contacted the hospital and the police, requesting that they send the medical team and officers to her home. Her reason for calling was that her son, Nobuyuki, had brutally beaten her again, tied her up, and used a taser on her multiple times. Authorities finally responded to she's pleas for help and arrived at her house. When the ambulance and police car appeared, Nobuyuki became visibly agitated, aggressive, and resistant. He had to be restrained with handcuffs and sedated with a large dose of medication. Nobuyuki's mother confessed to the authorities that she lived in fear of her son, whose behavior had become increasingly aggressive and uncontrollable. She also revealed that she had not been allowed to access the second floor of her home for years, as Nobuyuki had forbidden it, threatening to kill her if she disobeyed. Upon entering the second floor and Nobuyuki's room, the police made a shocking discovery. A pile of blankets on the bed moved slightly, and when the officers peeled them back, they found a thin, pale, and exhausted girl hiding underneath. When questioned, she identified herself and revealed that she had been kidnapped by Nobuyuki while walking home from school a long time ago. After the discovery, the police brought Nobuyuki's mother into the room to ask if she knew the captive girl. However, she was shocked and claimed she had no idea that anyone else lived in the house besides her and her son. The kidnapped girl also claimed that she had never seen she before. During questioning, Nobuyuki made a shocking confession. He recalled the day he saw Fusako on the road and thought she was cute, so he decided to take her home with him. According to Nobuyuki, he took care of Fusako, feeding her, washing her, dressing her, and reading her comic books. He only punished her when she disobeyed him. Nobuyuki also admitted that he loved Fusako like a friend and believed she felt the same way about him. He had no intention of letting her go and hoped she would stay with him forever. He enjoyed spending time with her, talking to her for hours about soccer, music, or his favorite comic book characters, and she would listen silently. Nobuyuki claimed that he never locked his bedroom door, but Fusako never tried to escape, which led him to believe that she was happy living with him. A medical examination concluded that despite his mental disorder, Nobuyuki was able to understand his actions and thus was eligible to stand trial. However, questions were raised about whether his mother could be held accountable as an accomplice. She often bought feminine hygiene products for her son, which raised suspicions. Despite her repeated efforts to alert authorities and get medical help for her family, her concerns were consistently disregarded. The case drew widespread attention before the trial even began, the city police facing heavy criticism. Nobuyuki had previously been prosecuted for attempting to kidnap a schoolgirl. But he had managed to avoid suspicion when he carried out his plan. As a result, the local police chief and the head of the regional police department were removed from their posts for failing to control the situation from the start and making numerous mistakes. Nobuyuki Sato went on trial in May 2000. The prosecution thoroughly examined every detail of his actions, including minor offenses. Nobuyuki was found guilty and sentenced to 14 years in prison, the maximum term. He was released in the spring of 2015 after serving his sentence. By then, his mother had passed away in a nursing home, and Nobuyuki had no other relatives. He was found dead about a year and a half later, in early 2017, in a small rented room. The cause of his death was not disclosed. When Fusako was discovered, she was extremely weak and could barely stand. Doctors diagnosed her with exhaustion, dehydration, and muscle atrophy. She also stuttered, was afraid of sunlight, and had lost most of her communication skills. Her parents didn't even recognize their daughter when they saw her after nearly a decade. It took Fusako about a year to recover physically, but her mental health took much longer to heal. She suffered from severe post-traumatic stress disorder and became withdrawn, avoiding people. Her intelligence was also affected, remaining at the level of a 9-10 years old child. Her parents took her out of town, changed her name to Sachiko Yamada, and refused to speak to the press. Over time, Sachiko made friends, took up photography, and even passed her driver's license test. In 2007, a family outing took a devastating turn when her father accidentally drowned in a pond she tragically witnessed. Welcome back, detectives. Let's dive into another horrible case, the case of Patrick de la Cerda. Patrick de la Cerda was born in June 1992 in Miami, Florida, a city known for its picturesque metropolitan area. His father, Max Dira, was a native of Spain, while his mother, Patricia Ranza, was born and raised in France before moving to the United States in the 1980s, where she met and married Max. Patrick grew up in a warm family environment where he was surrounded by love, care, and mutual respect. He was a kind, intelligent, and sociable person who excelled in school and had a large circle of friends. From a young age, Patrick was very close to his parents, who prioritized his education and well-being, providing him with every opportunity to grow into a capable and responsible individual. Patrick's father was a dedicated and skilled professional in the construction industry. Although the family was not wealthy, they were considered well-off by the standards of the big city. After completing high school, Patrick decided to follow in his father's footsteps and pursue a degree in construction. However, during his time at university, his parents made the difficult decision to divorce after nearly 25 years of marriage. The divorce of Patrick's parents was a quiet and peaceful one, with no scandals or disputes over property. After the separation, his mother moved to Deltona, a small town on the east coast of the state, where she eventually remarried. Patrick, on the other hand, chose to stay with his father in Miami, where they worked together in the construction industry and were highly respected. Despite the divorce, the family remained very close, and all members maintained a friendly relationship with one another. The family continued to stay in touch, regularly calling and communicating with each other. They were always willing to lend a helping hand when needed. Patrick often visited his mother in Deltona and shared with her details of his life, including his relationships and romantic interests. With his French and Spanish heritage, Patrick had grown up to be a charming and attractive young man, which helped him win over women at a relatively young age. Patrick grew up in a family that valued strong relationships, so he never sought casual flings. Instead, he dreams of finding lasting love, living peacefully, and building a lifelong family with someone special. He created a profile on a popular dating website at the suggestion of a friend, but he didn't have high hopes of actually meeting his soul mate on the dating website. One June evening in 2017, Patrick half-heartedly scrolled through profiles of women on the site. Then, he came across a photo that caught his attention, a stunning brunette with an unforgettable appearance, big, expressive eyes, and a charming smile. Patrick was immediately smitten and decided to send her a message. She replied, much to his delight, and they easily fell into a comfortable conversation. Jessica Devnani was born in 1988 in Orlando, Florida. After high school, she attended a local university where she studied banking. Following graduation, she landed a job at a bank branch in her hometown. Around that time, she met a handsome young man online. They quickly hit it off, exchanging messages and eventually phone numbers. They had long conversations every day, creating a deep emotional bond and strong trust. As their online friendship grew, they decided to meet in person. Since they lived in different parts of the state, they chose a meet-up spot roughly equidistant from each other. On their first date, Patrick knew he had found the person he had been searching for, and he didn't want to let her go. Jessica felt the same way about him. However, Jessica was slightly taken aback by their age difference. She was 4 years older than Patrick. After their date, on his way home, Patrick called his mother to tell her what happened. They had been in a long-distance relationship for months, which was becoming increasingly difficult. Due to the distance between them, they could only see each other on weekends, and even then, they had to meet at a location convenient for both of them. Usually, they will rent a cozy hotel room in a secluded spot and use the time to enjoy quality time together. However, by Sunday night, they would have to return to their respective homes, as they had work commitments on Monday mornings. In December 2017, Patrick made a significant decision. He relocated to Delton, where his mother lived, in order to be nearer to his girlfriend. He purchased a house in a quiet neighborhood and began making repairs to create a welcoming home for Jessica. Although she couldn't move right away because of work, but they made plans to get together again and have a housewarming party in early spring. They had a special celebration planned on New Year's Eve. To surprise Jessica, Patrick set up a fireworks display in the backyard, getting down on one knee to make his romantic proposal as they gazed up at the festive lights. Patrick got down on one knee, held out a box with a ring, and asked Jessica the most important question of all: would she become his wife? Overjoyed, Jessica happily agreed. Patrick had been looking for an engagement ring for a long time, but in jewelry stores there was no ring beautiful and delicate enough for the occasion. He chose the best option possible to propose before the new year, but he also had a custom ring made from a jewelry shop, designed by himself. Patrick's engagement was just 2 months old, and the wedding preparations were well underway. His choice of partner had been approved by their parents, and they was overjoyed as they prepared to start a new life together. They had plans for a grand celebration, either in Miami on the shores of the Atlantic Ocean or in France, where the groom's mother was from, on February 27, 2018. On that day, Patrick's father, Max, received a call from a courier while he was at work. The delivery man explained that Patrick's order has been delivered, but Patrick did not answer the door or answer the phone. Max was taken aback by Patrick's unexpected actions, which immediately raised his level of concern. Since Max was tied up at work and couldn't go check on Patrick, Max asked his future daughter-in-law to go instead. Patrick's father called Jessica in a panicked tone, saying he couldn't reach his son. Jessica had been trying to contact Patrick all morning, but he wasn't responding to her calls or messages. When she shared this with Patrick's father, Max, he feared the worst. Jessica immediately dropped everything and rushed to Patrick's house. When she arrived, she saw his car in the driveway, indicating he was still at home. Using her own key, she entered the yard and called out to Patrick, but there was no response. Jessica carefully opened the front door and was met with a horrific sight. Patrick was lying in a pool of blood, showing no signs of life. She quickly called emergency services, but the paramedics were unable to save Patrick and declared him dead at the scene. When the police arrived, Jessica was overcome with grief, sobbing in the backyard where Patrick had proposed to her just 2 months earlier. An officer spoke to her, and she raised her tear-filled eyes to meet his. She claimed to know who was accountable for Patrick's murder, naming her wealthy ex-boyfriend as the culprit. To comprehend this complex case and identify potential suspects, it's essential to revisit the past when Patrick first met Jessica. At that time, Jessica was in a relationship with Gregory Bender, a wealthy businessman who owned an investment fund. She met Gregory during her student years, and he was 20 years her senior. Gregory showered Jessica with expensive gifts and took her on lavish vacations, eventually winning her affection. Jessica thought she had found her soulmate, but soon she began to notice some disturbing patterns in her ex-boyfriend Gregory's behavior. He was extremely controlling, constantly monitoring her movements and interactions with others. If she had an admirer, Gregory would quickly get rid of them through threats and intimidation. Meanwhile, he kept his own life a mystery, sharing very little about himself with Jessica. Their relationship lasted nearly 8 years, during which time Gregory never introduced Jessica to his family or friends. They only spent time together or went on vacation when he wanted to, and he rarely invited her to his home. Gregory claimed he was too busy, but Jessica longed for a normal family life and children. However, every time she brought it up, Gregory would say it wasn't the right time. When Jessica tried to end the relationship, Gregory proposed to her with a ring, and she accepted. However, nothing changed. They still lived apart and only saw each other when Gregory wanted to. One day, Gregory was in a car accident and ended up in the hospital. When Jessica rushed to his side, she decided to stop by his house to pick up some things for him. That's when she encountered a woman she had never seen before. Instead of introducing herself, the stranger asked Jessica who she was. Jessica showed her the ring on her hand and that she was the landlord's fiancée. Jessica later found out that Gregory was married to someone else, Diora Sanchez Bender. Devastated, Jessica immediately broke off the relationship. However, Gregory really wanted to keep her, begging for forgiveness and promising to divorce his wife and marry Jessica in the future. Jessica eventually gave in and continued the affair, but as time went on, nothing changed, and Jessica became exhausted. Jessica changed her life and started dating someone new, Patrick, through a dating website. She then ended her relationship with Gregory and informed him that it was over. But Gregory did not give up and started to do worse things. Gregory asked Jessica to reconsider their relationship. He then became aggressive, and he resorted to threatening and harassing her. Realizing that Jessica had moved on, Gregory turned to private investigators to hack into her online accounts and find out who she was talking to. He soon discovered Patrick's identity and contact information. Then, Gregory started sending threatening messages to Patrick. Patrick received threatening messages from Gregory, Jessica's ex-boyfriend, who demanded that Patrick end his relationship with Jessica, referring to her as his fiancée. After receiving the threats, Patrick remained calm because he thought they would not come true. However, Jessica is scared because she knows Gregory's aggressive nature and that he has a large collection of weapons. She suggested breaking up with Patrick to avoid any potential harm, but Patrick refused. They decided to report the incidents to the police, providing evidence of Gregory's stalking and threats. They obtained a restraining order, which prohibited Gregory from approaching or contacting them. Additionally, Gregory was required to surrender his firearms. For a while, the situation seemed to calm down, and they thought they had finally found peace. Nevertheless, Jessica convinced Patrick to install CCTV cameras around and inside their home, fearing that Gregory might violate the restraining order. Let's go back to the events of February 27, 2018. During the initial crime scene inspection, investigators quickly ruled out robbery as a motive. Instead, they believed the murder was personally motivated, given the nature of Patrick's injuries, which suggested a deep-seated hatred. Patrick, 25 years old, had 4 gunshot wounds, 1 in the thigh, 1 in the chest, and 2 in the head. The body also showed signs of a fall from a ladder. The body was found on the floor between the front door and the stairs leading to the second floor. Investigators theorized that the killer likely snuck into the house and waited for the owner, Patrick, on the second floor. When Patrick entered the house and began to climb the stairs, the killer ambushed him, shooting him in the thigh. As Patrick rolled down the stairs, the killer followed, shooting him in the chest and then twice in the head. The murder weapon, a rare pistol, was not recovered, but several shell casings were found at the crime scene. The police found 3 casings at the scene, but a 4th one was missing. This led investigators to suspect that the killer might have taken it as a souvenir. The initial suspect was Patrick's neighbor, a U.S. Army veteran who had a history of conflict with Patrick. The veteran had been involved in combat and had suffered a severe head injury, which led to the development of a mental disorder. The veteran was skilled with firearms and had access to rare guns. In a previous incident, the veteran had mistakenly shot at his neighbor, thinking he was a burglar. After his release, the veteran continued to harass the victim, accusing him of being a spy and threatening to expose him. The investigation initially centered around the veteran with a history of mental health issues, as his unusual behavior and mindset suggested a possible motive for the crime. Although he truly hated Patrick, he still had an alibi for the time of the murder, confirmed by many witnesses. As the police looked for evidence and attempted to provoke a response from the perpetrator, it became clear that the crime was not a robbery gone, as the house was undisturbed and valuables remained untouched. The only items missing were the hard drives containing video surveillance footage, making it impossible to identify who entered and left the house that day. Furthermore, no evidence was found at the crime scene. Forensic experts were unable to find a single fingerprint, shoe print, or DNA trace, suggesting that the murder was meticulously planned and executed. Although the investigation suspected Gregory's involvement, it seemed likely that he would escape justice due to the lack of concrete evidence. The police asked Jessica to help them with a secret plan to catch her ex-boyfriend, Gregory, off guard. She agreed to make the call, and as the police had hoped, Gregory answered. Jessica tried to lure him into a conversation, but it quickly became apparent that he had anticipated the trap and was not falling for it. Gregory seemed unflappable as Jessica confronted him about Patrick's death. When she accused him directly, he acted shocked and even offered her his condolences. Despite her best efforts to get him to lose his cool, he didn't give away any incriminating information. In the end, the police didn't have enough evidence to hold or question Gregory, so he remained at large, abiding by the terms of a restraining order. He appeared to have already distanced himself from Jessica, makes gathering evidence more difficult. As the police investigation stagnated due to lack of evidence, Diora Sanchez, Gregory's wife, called to reveal she had vital information about Patrick's death. Upon arrival at the police station, Diora told investigators about discovering a cryptic notebook in Gregory's office just days before the crime occurred. Upon flipping through the notebook's pages, Diora stumbled upon an entry containing an address she didn't recognize, accompanied by a series of cryptic digits that appeared to be a code. Diora had previously ignored some suspicious sketches made by Gregory, but when she saw a news report about a young man's murder, she realized the significance of those sketches. The crime scene's layout matched the drawings Gregory had made. Diora informed the investigators, who then obtained a search warrant for Gregory's house. Upon searching, the police found a mysterious notebook in Gregory's office, but several key pages were missing. They later discovered those pages in a trash can, carelessly discarded after being ripped out and crumpled. The pages contained a detailed plan of the crime, including turning off the victim's phone, wearing gloves, and using a special lubricant on shoes to avoid leaving footprints. The records also revealed that Gregory had been stalking the victim, Patrick, and knew his daily routine, including the time he returned home. Furthermore, Gregory knew the location of surveillance cameras in and around Patrick's house, suggesting this was a carefully planned and executed crime. In addition to committing the crime, Gregory took steps to cover his tracks by disposing of the weapon, clothes, shoes, and gloves. However, he failed to destroy his own records, which later incriminated him. Furthermore, his wife's curiosity ultimately worked against him. A shell casing was discovered in a cigar box, which was meant to be taken as a trophy by the gunman. Forensic analysis confirmed that the casing matched the one found at the crime scene. The trial of Gregory posed a challenge due to the lack of direct evidence. Although the accumulated evidence was sufficient to arrest him, it was largely circumstantial. Since the crime weapon was never recovered, there was no definitive proof that Gregory was at the victim's house on the day of the crime. Moreover, there were no eyewitnesses to testify against him. The trial, which began in May 2021, more than 3 years after the crime, was heavily influenced by the skilled lawyers Gregory hired. He appeared confident and seemed to believe he would evade punishment. A crucial witness, Jessica, provided detailed testimony about her long-term relationship with Gregory, including his marital status, her attempts to break up with him, and the subsequent harassment and threats he made against her and Patrick. Jessica presented evidence of her conversations with Gregory, including screenshots of their conversations and their phone records. However, Gregory's lawyers countered by blaming Jessica, claiming that she was responsible for Gregory's behavior. They claimed that Jessica had started a new relationship with Patrick while still involved with Gregory, and that she had hurt his self-esteem. The defense downplayed the significance of the written plans for the murder, describing them as mere fantasies of a hurt man seeking revenge on his rival. They argued that Gregory never acted on these plans and therefore did not leave any evidence at the crime scene. Additionally, the lawyers claimed that the search of Gregory's home was conducted illegally and with procedural errors, suggesting that the shell casing found there could have been planted. The crime weapon was never found, and Jessica's identification of the gun model was uncertain. She had previously seen a similar gun in her boyfriend's collection, but she wasn't familiar with firearms and could have been mistaken. The defendant's ex-wife, Diora Sanchez, was called to testify. During her testimony, the defendant, Gregory, unexpectedly professed his love for Diora. This declaration seemed to affect Diora, and her testimony became unclear. Diora claimed to have forgotten some details and ultimately stated that she doubted Gregory's capability for murder, given their long history together. Despite the defense's efforts to challenge the search of Gregory's home and the lack of direct evidence, the jury found him guilty of first-degree murder after hours of deliberation. Gregory was given a life sentence with no possibility of parole. As the judge read out the sentence, the defendant fixed Jessica with an intense stare, not blinking once. His glare made her feel nauseous. Jessica sat next to Patrick's mother and suddenly burst into uncontrollable sobs, finding it hard to breathe. Despite multiple attempts by Gregory's lawyers to appeal the verdict, all their efforts were unsuccessful. The case attracted public attention, with many outraged that a wealthy businessman had brutally murdered a working-class man and attempted to escape justice. Patrick's story was widely reported in the press, and Gregory remains in prison to this day. Jessica Dira said she is grateful that justice has been served. And Patrick's memory will always live on in her. She wears the engagement ring he gave her and a special piece of jewelry he had intended to give her but never got the chance. Jessica remains close to Patrick's parents, who have welcomed her into their family as one of their own. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of Sumner family. Carol and Reggie Sumner raised in Charleston, South Carolina. They were born in the same year, went to the same school, and were even in the same grade. Over time, their childhood friendship blossomed into a deeper affection. Neither of them recalls exactly when they began to develop romantic feelings for each other, but by the time they were 15 years old in 1959, they were dating. Their friends described them as a beautiful and harmonious couple. Reggie and Carol treasured their memories, keeping photos of their happy times together in their home archives. At the time, it seemed like they had their whole lives ahead of them, and they looked forward to a long and happy future together. Their feelings for each other were strong and mutual, and they were practically inseparable both in and out of school. They even started making plans to get married as soon as they turned 18. With the full support of their parents. In 1962, Reggie and Carol, a young couple, graduated from high school. However, their plans to get married were put on hold when Reggie was drafted into the Army a few months later. They decided to postpone their wedding until Reggie returned from his military service and made a promise to write each other regularly. As time passed, the separation took its toll. Reggie was deployed to Vietnam. Unfortunately, Carol lost contact with him, and she didn't even know if he was still alive. Despite the uncertainty, Carol continued her education and started working at the Charleston Air Force Base. A few years later, Carol got married, but the marriage was short-lived and ended in divorce. They didn't have any children together. In 1975, Carol married again, this time to Richard Alford, and gave birth to their daughter, Rhonda, in 1977. However, this marriage was also troubled, as Richard was abusive and had a drinking problem. The situation became unbearable for Carol, and by the mid-1980s, she couldn't take the abuse anymore. She took her daughter and filed for divorce. However, Richard refused to leave her alone and continued to harass her, trying to ruin her life. In 1987, Richard purchased a handgun and ammunition. After a night of heavy drinking, he went to his ex-wife Carol's home, intending to confront her. When Carol answered the door, their 10-year-old daughter Rhonda was present in the room. However, the presence of his child did not deter Richard, who was intoxicated. He pulled out the gun and shot Carol multiple times in front of Rhonda. Richard then drove to a secluded area, where he fired the remaining bullet into his temple, taking his own life. Carol was fortunate to survive the shooting due to the prompt response of neighbors, who heard the gunshots and Rhonda's cries for help. They called the police and an ambulance, which rushed Carol to the hospital. Carol's condition was critical, and she underwent several complex surgeries and blood transfusions. Although she eventually recovered, she suffered significant injuries, including complete blindness in her right eye and permanent disability. Years later, in the late 1990s, Carol's health began to deteriorate again. She experienced severe pain, weight loss, and weakness. After a thorough examination at the hospital, she received a devastating diagnosis: liver cancer. Tragically, as a result of being severely injured by gunshot wounds, Carol lost her position on an Air Force base. With cancer added to her medical complications, she found that physical strain, prolonged periods on her feet, and any heavy physical exertion exceeded her capability. Given these medical constraints, Carol then decided to re-enter the workforce as a call center operator for a cable television provider within her hometown, Charleston. Reggie was in Vietnam for a long time, and due to the prolonged war, he was severely wounded and nearly lost his leg. He spent a significant amount of time in the hospital, and during this period, his name was mistakenly listed among the dead. As a result, his relatives believed he had passed away. Reggie was fortunate to survive and eventually returned home. However, by then, he had lost touch with his former lover, Carol, who had moved to a different location, gotten married, and also assumed Reggie had died in the war. Years later, Reggie got married, but his war injuries led to the development of diabetes and other chronic diseases. He was never able to become a father, and eventually, his marriage ended in separation. Since then, he has lived alone. Reggie found work as a laborer at the local railroad and no longer expected any pleasant surprises from life. In the fall of 2000, Carol was having a typical day at work, answering phones and advising customers. When she picked up another call, she was shocked to hear a voice that sent shivers down her spine. It was a voice she knew all too well, her first high school love, Reggie. However, she was hesitant to respond, as she had thought Reggie was dead. After answering the customer's questions, Carol mustered up the courage to say Reggie's full name out loud. There was a pause on the other end of the line, followed by Reggie's timid question. Carol burst into tears, revealing that she was he had dated in high school, the one he had once wanted to marry. For several minutes, they both cried, unable to speak. Eventually, they composed themselves and discovered that they still lived in their hometown. They agreed to meet the next evening, reuniting after all these years. The next day, Carol spent hours getting ready for the date, trying on different dresses and perfecting her hair and makeup. As she looked in the mirror, she was reminded that time had changed her. She was no longer the young, vibrant woman Reggie remembered from the past. Still, she was eager to win him over once more. Their meeting was thrilling for both, having spent decades apart, and their conversation was unrelenting as they recounted stories from their lives, both happy and sorrowful, covering their previous marriages. Professional triumphs, struggles, health challenges, and basking in nostalgia as they reflected on their lost romance and first true love for one another. Reggie and Carol were determined to make the most of their reunion after a period of separation. They quickly fell into a routine of spending every day together, and within a couple of weeks, they decided to take the next step by moving in together. Just 5 months later, they got married, and Carol joined her husband in his home in the Riverland Terrace neighborhood. As they settled into family life, they initially resided in their hometown of Charleston, South Carolina. They were deeply in love, happy, and enthusiastic about building a life together. However, they faced some challenges, particularly with their health, as they were both still young but struggling with health issues. One of the neighbors who lived nearby was the Cole family, with whom Reggie had a long-standing acquaintance. The patriarch of the family, Stephen, had experienced firsthand the traumatic effects of the Vietnam War. Sustaining severe wounds during combat had resulted in confinement to a wheelchair for many years. His wife, Natalie, often prioritized her social life, spending time with friends at bars after work, instead of rushing home to take care of her family. As a result, their daughter, Tiffany, found herself frequently neglected and left unattended from a young age. Tiffany's situation improved slightly when she befriended the new neighbors, Reggie and Carol. During this time, Tiffany was still in high school, and the compassionate Carol took an instant liking to she. Carol felt genuine sympathy for Tiffany. For 5 years, Carol did her best to support and care for Tiffany, sometimes sponsoring cozy family meals, buying Tiffany clothes, and sharing enough allowance. Carol treated Tiffany like a daughter, showering her with love, care, and attention. When the Carol and Reggie decided to sell their Chevrolet Lumina minivan in 2004, Tiffany asked to buy it from them on an installment plan, as she desperately needed a car but had no money. They kindly offered to sell it to her for a minimal amount, which they divided into 12 monthly payments. In early 2005, Carol and Reggie made a difficult decision to leave their home and relocate to Florida. Their health had begun to decline significantly, and doctors advised them to move to a warmer climate with ocean access. Since Carol and Reggie were both retired, they decided to make a big change and start over. Carol and Reggie sold their large home in Charleston and bought a new place in Jacksonville, Florida. They also purchased a new Lincoln Town car. They was very happy and settled into their new life, making plans for their future together. Carol would call her adult daughter Rhonda every day to share her thoughts, plans, and daily experiences. However, in June 2005, Rhonda was surprised and concerned when her mother didn't call her as usual. At first, Rhonda tried to brush off her worries, hoping that everything was fine with her parents and that they would call her back soon. But when the next day passed without hearing from them, Rhonda's concern grew. She tried calling her parents' cell phones every 30 minutes, but they were now out of service. She also left messages on their home phone, but none of them were returned. Rhonda set out on a solo road trip to check on her mother and stepfather in another state. After a 5-hour drive, she arrived at their house. What struck her as unusual was the absence of a car in the driveway. Things only got stranger from there. As she approached the front door, she found it slightly ajar, an eerie quietness, and a light on in one of the rooms despite the bright sunlight outside. Rhonda called out for her mother and stepfather Reggie, but received no response. She ventured into the kitchen, where she was greeted by a scene that looked like a sudden and mysterious departure. A table was set for two, with food that appeared to have been left untouched for days. The rest of the house was also in disarray, with belongings scattered about and doors and cupboards left open. Adding to the sense of abandonment and unease, their bedroom showed signs of a thorough search, but it was unclear what the person was looking for or who was responsible. On the bedside table, essential medications were left behind, including her mother's cancer pills, which she took 3 times a day, and Reggie's insulin, which he administered hourly. Notably, their cell phones were completely out of battery, rendering them useless. Rhonda quickly realized that her mother and stepfather were unable to leave their home without their essential medications and cell phones. She immediately contacted the police to report the incident, alerting them to the suspicious individuals. They in the car was quickly added to the wanted list, and all bank cards belonging to Carol and Reggie were frozen. The first few days of the search yielded nothing, with no sign of the imposters or any witnesses. However, on June 12, several developments led the police to close in on the perpetrators. A crucial lead emerged when a man, claiming to be Reggie, contacted one of the banks, complaining that his card was blocked and he was unable to withdraw cash. A bank employee grew suspicious when checking the card information and offered to resolve the issue by visiting a nearby branch, but the caller, Mr. Reggie, hung up. Minutes later, a woman called from the same number, claiming to be Mrs. Carroll, and reported a similar problem with her card being blocked. When the bank asked her to visit a branch in person, she refused, citing health issues, and urgently requested access to her savings. Her request was denied. The bank promptly handed over the call details and recordings to the police. The police investigation continued at the station, where they played the suspicious phone calls for Rhonda. She immediately confirmed that the voices did not belong to her Carol and Reggie. In fact, the voices sounded too young to be them. As a result, the authorities believed that the imposters were likely involved in the Carol and Reggie disappearance, either holding them captive or killing them after extracting information about their bank accounts and cards. The search for the missing couple led to a breakthrough a few days later, when their car was discovered abandoned on a remote road in a wooded area. A thorough examination of the vehicle revealed no signs of blood or struggle in the cabin. However, in the trunk, experts found hair and sweat marks that belonged to they. This suggested that they had been forcibly taken away in the trunk of their own car, leaving little hope for their safe return. The police investigated their bank transactions and found that money had been withdrawn from their account several times after they stopped hearing from their daughter. Reviewing the ATM surveillance footage revealed that the withdrawals were made by a young man who couldn't be identified right away. The police also requested a trace of all calls made from the phone number used by the imposters to contact the bank. Further investigation showed that the SIM card used to make those calls was purchased on a prepaid plan just before they disappeared. Unfortunately, the buyer's identity couldn't be determined, but it was discovered that the number was used to call a car rental company on June 6. Additionally, it was found that someone staying at a hotel had rented a Mazda RX-8 in the name of Tiffany Cole. Later, the same car was seen at the ATMs where the unidentified young man withdrew money from their accounts. A team of investigators used tracking beacons installed in rental cars to locate a Mazda RX-8, which was found parked at a hotel in Charleston. The car was linked to a couple who had been victimized by thieves, who had withdrawn $1,000 from her card and nearly $3,000 from her husband's card. A capture team was quickly dispatched to the hotel, where they burst into the room where the thieves were staying. The room was found to be filled with numerous packages and receipts from various stores, indicating that the thieves had been on a spending spree, purchasing items such as clothing, electronics, video games, cosmetics, perfumes, and expensive liquor. 3 people were found inside the location, clearly caught off guard by the police visit. Tiffany Cole, 23, her boyfriend Michael Jackson, 24, and Alan Lindell Wade, 19, all appeared surprised, confused, and frightened as police placed handcuffs on their wrists. The trio was taken to the police station, separated into different rooms for questioning, and initially pretended to be unaware of the accusations or refused to speak. A search of the premises uncovered significant evidence, including stolen bank cards, the laptop, some of Carol's jewelry, Reggie's expensive coin collection, the keys to their Lincoln Town car, and pawn shop receipts in Tiffany Cole's name. During the investigation, it was discovered that Tiffany had sold some of the stolen jewelry and spent the money with friends. After several hours of interrogation, Tiffany finally began to talk, bursting into tears as she confessed that she and her friends had robbed the elderly couple but claimed no further harm was done. The group then went on the run, using the stolen money for their own gain. Tiffany also implicated another individual, Bruce Kent Nixon, 19, who was paid $300 for his assistance in the crime. She stated that they never saw Bruce Kent Nixon again after the incident. Bruce Kent Nixon's decision to commit a crime was motivated by a promise of a fixed amount of money, which he quickly spent on illicit substances. As a result, he did not make an effort to hide or flee, living in the same city of Charleston. He was eventually arrested at his parents' home. It began in May 2005, when Tiffany visited the Summers to make a payment on a car she had purchased 6 months prior. The Summers, Carol, and Reggie were known for their hospitality and would often invite Tiffany to stay overnight or for a few days, treating her to good food and gifts. On this particular occasion, Tiffany arrived with her new boyfriend, and they were both welcomed to dinner and invited to stay overnight. During dinner, the Summers discussed their new life, and Carol inadvertently revealed that they had nearly $100,000 left over from the sale of their Charleston home, which they intended to use to enjoy their retirement without financial worries. Unbeknownst to her, Carol's careless comment sealed her in her husband's fate. Tiffany and Michael exchanged a telling glance, and that night, they began secretly plotting to get their hands on the Summers' substantial sum of money. In the morning, Tiffany and Michael bid they farewell and returned to South Carolina. Within a couple of weeks, they recruited accomplices and assigned roles and responsibilities. They then set their plan in motion. On June 6th, Tiffany rented an unassuming car. Meanwhile, Bruce Kent Nixon and Alan stole 4 shovels. Together, they drove to the outskirts of Jacksonville, where they identified a secluded spot in the woods and started digging a deep hole, which would ultimately become the Summers' grave. On the morning of July 8th, Tiffany purchased rope and duct tape from a hardware store, which she later provided to her accomplices, Bruce Kent Nixon and Alan. That evening, Bruce Kent Nixon and Alan approached the home of their intended victim, pretending to need assistance and asking to use the phone. Despite finding the young men suspicious, the homeowner, Carol, allowed them to enter. As soon as they were inside, they attacked Carol and her husband, who had rushed to her aid, threatening them with a toy gun. The Carol and Reggie was then bound with duct tape, blindfolded, and interrogated about the location of valuable items in the house, including their bank account information and PIN codes. They provided this information in an attempt to save their lives, as they were subjected to torture and death threats. After obtaining the necessary details, 2 additional individuals entered the house, assisting in dragging the Carol and Reggie into the backyard. They was then forced into the trunk of their own car, a Lincoln, which was being driven by Alan and Bruce Kent Nixon. Following behind them in a rented Mazda ARX-8 were Tiffany and Michael. The plan was that if a police patrol intercepted the car carrying the captive couple, a second car would draw the officers' attention away by recklessly speeding or breaking traffic rules. However, no police were encountered, and both cars reached their destination without incident. In the trunk, Reggie managed to free his arm and remove the bandages and duct tape covering his and his wife's faces, allowing them to breathe. However, there was no time to make any further attempts to escape. As the trunk lid opened, the Carol and Reggie was shocked and bewildered to see among their kidnappers Tiffany and her boyfriend, who had visited them recently. The kidnappers led the captive Carol and Reggie several dozen meters through the woods to a pre-dug grave. The Carol and Reggie begged for mercy, but their pleas fell on deaf ears. The young kidnappers brutally murdered them by burying them alive. According to Bruce Kent Nixon, the kidnappers spent about an hour burying the Carol and Reggie under earth. Throughout the horrific ordeal, the bound and helpless Carol and Reggie cried, confessed their love for each other, and said their goodbyes. The investigation revealed that the spouses had died from suffocation, with soil found in their mouths, respiratory tracts, and stomachs, indicating they had been buried alive. After committing the heinous crime, the perpetrators abandoned the Lincoln in the woods and returned to town in a rented car. They then went to the Sumner house, where they stole all the valuables they could find, before returning to South Carolina to spend their loot. However, their freedom was short-lived, as the stolen cards were blocked after 2 days, and all participants in the crime were arrested 4 days later. During the trial, Bruce Kent Nixon was the only one who fully admitted his guilt from the beginning and cooperated with the investigation, hoping for a lighter sentence. He led the authorities to the burial site of the spouses and provided a detailed account of the events of that fateful night. In contrast, Tiffany claimed that her boyfriend, Michael, was the mastermind behind the crime, driven by greed after learning about the large sum of money the Sumner family had received from the sale of their house. Tiffany's lawyer argued that she was merely an accomplice and not directly involved in the murder. Michael and Alan chose not to testify, but the evidence against them was overwhelming. The jury did not believe Tiffany Cole was innocent because she was involved in planning the crime, rented a car, and created a diversion in case they were chased by police. She also helped dig a grave for the victims and sold stolen items at a pawn shop, using the money to buy clothes and rent a limousine to celebrate their success, as seen in numerous photos. As a result, Bruce Kent Nixon was sentenced to life in prison without parole, while Michael Jackson, Tiffany, and Alan Lindell were given the death penalty. The criminals filed multiple appeals, but they were all denied, and the sentence remained unchanged. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of Wang Nan. Wang Nan, born in 1987 in Nanjing, China, a major city and former capital, Wang Nan grew up in a relatively affluent family. Her parents provided her with the best possible education and encouraged her to develop her talents. After completing her secondary education, Wang Nan enrolled in a prestigious university, where she studied business and finance, and also learned several foreign languages. Upon graduation, she landed a job at a large travel agency, where she quickly proved herself to be a valuable, responsible, and motivated employee. Her career advanced rapidly, and she was soon sent to Thailand to head a new branch and oversee its development. Wang Nan worked as a top manager for several years before deciding to leave the agency to start her own business. She opened a Chinese restaurant in Bangkok, which she managed successfully, and it eventually grew into a small but popular chain. Wang Nan was a thriving young entrepreneur who had devoted her life to her career. With her constant business engagements, she barely had time for socializing or dating, and her loneliness became a normal part of her life. At almost 30 years old, Wang Nan was well established in Thailand, having lived there for a while and become proficient in the language. However, she strived for further improvement, taking additional courses to learn Thai at a training center. There, she met a young man named Yu Xiaodong, who initially stared at her before introducing himself in his native language. They exchanged brief conversations, and he inquired about her reason for studying the language. Wang Nan replied that it was for business purposes, and Yu Xiaodong proposed exchanging business cards to potentially meet up Sunday. Although Wang Nan was not interested in continuing the conversation, she still politely gave him her business card. Yu Xiaodong also gave Wang Nan his own business card, which said that he worked in the import-export industry in Bangkok. Not very impressed, Wang Nan put the business card in her wallet and forgot about it. Yu Xiaodong was the only one who showed genuine interest in Wang Nan, and he wasted no time in calling her the very next day. However, she was preoccupied with work and couldn't spare even a few minutes to talk, so she declined his invitation to meet for coffee. A few days later, Yu Xiaodong asked her out again, but Wang Nan turned him down once more, citing her busy schedule and preparations for an upcoming business conference where she hoped to expand her professional network. Undeterred, Yu Xiaodong showed up at the conference with a stunning bouquet of flowers and waited for Wang Nan to become available. When she was free, he approached her and asked her out once more. This time, Wang Nan was charmed by his persistence, which was a new experience for her. No one had ever pursued her so relentlessly before, so she agreed to meet him for dinner. As it turned out, Yu Xiaodong's interest in Wang Nan was more than just a passing infatuation. He was completely smitten. He showered her with attention, surprise gifts, and romantic gestures, including sending flowers to her doorstep every morning with sweet notes attached. He also called her at least twice a day to wish her good morning and good night. Wang Nan had mixed emotions about the situation. While she was irritated by Yu Xiaodong's all-consuming infatuation, she was also flattered that someone was making such an effort to win her heart. As a result, she found herself unexpectedly entering into a romantic relationship. Yu Xiaodong went out of his way to woo her, not only romantically but also by trying to be perfect in every aspect of their relationship. He shared her interests and opinions, learned to cook her favorite meals, and planned exciting activities for them to enjoy together. He was also eager to help her with her work and household chores at a moment's notice. Wang Nan was over the moon with happiness, feeling as though she was living in a fairy tale. Yu Xiaodong's behavior, however, was moving at a breakneck pace. Despite having only been together for a few months, he was already making plans for their wedding and discussing potential names for their future children. This made Wang Nan uncomfortable, but Yu Xiaodong would counter by pointing out that they were both in their 30s and that it was time for them to start thinking about building a family. That night, Yu Xiaodong wrote a heartfelt letter to Wang Nan, expressing his deep affection and commitment to being a good husband and father. The next morning, he arrived at her doorstep with a bouquet of flowers, reiterating his seriousness about marrying her. Wang Nan jokingly mentioned that the courthouse wouldn't open for another hour and a half, but Yu Xiaodong suggested they go there immediately. To her surprise, the courthouse was open, and the officer responsible for registering marriages was already at his desk, ready to formalize their union. Yu Xiaodong had secretly arranged for a hasty marriage ceremony to take place early in the morning. The whole event was unusual and lacking in formality. There were no guests, no exchange of rings, no wedding dress or veil, and no commemorative photographs. Wang Nan couldn't shake the feeling that the whole thing wasn't really happening, especially since she hadn't even introduced her new husband to her mother, with whom she was extremely close. Before she knew it, she was holding a marriage certificate in her hand, and her newlywed husband was standing beside her, beaming with satisfaction. Wang Nan's marriage was troubled from the start. She had second thoughts about marrying Yu Xiaodong almost immediately after the wedding. Initially, she had hoped he would be a reliable partner, a man she could depend on. Unfortunately, her expectations were not met, and her new husband's true nature soon revealed itself. Yu Xiaodong spent most of his time at home playing video games, using his wife's money without contributing to their household expenses. Whenever his wife asked him why he wasn't working, he claimed his business was slow due to seasonal fluctuations and that he was just taking a break. However, her suspicions grew as time passed, and she decided to investigate his business. Her findings shocked her. His supposedly successful import-export company existed only on paper and business cards. One man was horrified, realizing too late that she should have had a prenuptial agreement. Now, her husband could freely spend her earnings, and if they divorced, he would claim her assets. During a tense conversation, Yu Xiaodong broke down in tears, promising to turn his life around and find a good job. However, it soon became apparent that he had no intention of looking for work and was content to rely on his wife's support. Yu Xiaodong, a grown man, consistently acted like a child. He spent most of his time playing computer games and expected his wife, Wang Nan, to pay for his personal expenses whenever he helped out around the house or assisted her at the restaurant. Wang Nan eventually had enough and told him she would no longer give him money unless he got a job. The next day, Yu Xiaodong disappeared, taking their marriage certificate and Wang Nan's identity card with him. Wang Nan only discovered the missing documents that evening when her accountant called to inquire about a large transfer of funds from her account. She was shocked, as she had not authorized the transfer. However, she immediately suspected her husband's involvement. It turned out that Yu Xiaodong had transferred more than $500,000 into his own account, using the stolen documents to deceive the bank into thinking it was their joint decision to transfer their shared money. Wang Nan quickly reported the theft to the police, who tracked down Yu Xiaodong a few hours later as he attempted to withdraw some of the stolen money. Confronted by the police and his wife, Xiaodong broke down and begged for forgiveness on his knees. He confessed to losing a large sum of money through gambling, which had led to threats of death and demands to repay the debt. This was not his first brush with the law, as he had previously served an 8-year prison sentence for robbery in his home country of China. One man was consumed by shame as she learned the truth about her husband's past. Despite this, she believed that his addiction to gambling was a disease that could be overcome, and she wanted to help him recover and return to a normal life. To support him, Wang Nan agreed to pay off half of his debt and offered him a job as heater of one of her restaurants. Initially, Yu Xiaodong appeared to be grateful for the opportunity and took his new role seriously. He even developed a promising strategy for the restaurant's growth. However, his enthusiasm was short-lived. Before long, he began to spend more time playing computer games and indulging in other leisure activities. Meanwhile, Wang Nan discovered she was pregnant and shared the news with her husband. Yu Xiaodong initially expressed reservations about the pregnancy, and in a moment of hesitation, asked his wife to consider an abortion, which she flatly refused. The disagreement escalated to the point where he threatened divorce and division of their property, but eventually, his demeanor softened, and he apologized for his rash words. Yu Xiaodong later admitted that his outburst was driven by emotional anxiety, but ultimately, he was happy about the impending arrival of their child. However, things took a dramatic turn 2 months later. During a fateful trip, Yu Xiaodong suggested that his wife purchase life insurance, citing the pregnancy as a reason to safeguard her well-being and that of their unborn child in the event of any unforeseen circumstances. This seemingly caring gesture came after a period of harmony in their marriage, where he had been attentive, supportive, and diligent in his role as a husband and expectant father. Wang Nan quickly agreed to her husband's suggestion and even wondered why she hadn't thought of it herself. They purchased insurance the very next day. A couple of weeks later, Yu Xiaodong proposed a vacation to help them relax and unwind. Wang Nan was initially hesitant, but her husband was insistent. He pointed out that they had never had a honeymoon and that traveling with a baby would be difficult in the coming years. He also felt that they needed a break to clear their minds of the stress and negativity they had been experiencing. Wang Nan was eventually won over by her husband's arguments and agreed to the trip. He took charge of planning the entire vacation, choosing the destination, booking the hotel, and organizing activities that would be enjoyable and educational, yet not too strenuous for Wang Nan's pregnant state. Wang Nan was happy to leave the planning to her husband and was pleased to see how much effort he was putting into making their vacation special. On June 7th, they visited the park for the first time and spent most of the day exploring its many beautiful sights and lookouts. However, as the summer evening wore on, the park became increasingly crowded, with tourists everywhere. As the sun began to set, Wang Nan noticed that her husband, Yu Xiaodong, was growing angry and nervous. When she asked him what was wrong, he explained that the crowds were ruining their chance to enjoy a romantic sunset in peace. Despite his initial frustration, Yu Xiaodong tried to make the most of the situation, suggesting that they could still have a romantic moment as the sun set. As the park began to clear out, he climbed the fence of the observation deck and called out to his wife, Wang Nan, to join him, promising her an incredible view. However, Wang declined, citing the darkness and potential danger. Yu Xiaodong became angry but eventually returned to his wife, suggesting that they should come back to the park another time to watch the sunrise together. The Wang Nan and Yu Xiaodong returned to their hotel late on Saturday night, so they decided to sleep in and head back to the reserve early on Sunday morning. As planned, they woke up at 3 a.m. on June 9th and left for the national park while it was still dark outside. Their goal was to catch the first rays of the rising sun. When they arrived, they found the park nearly empty, with hardly any other visitors. They watched the sunrise together on an observation deck. Then, Yu Xiaodong encouraged his wife, Wang Nan, to join him at the cliff's edge to see some ancient rock paintings. Initially hesitant, Wang Nan trusted her husband's assurance that he would help her climb down and back up safely. As they took in the breathtaking view, Yu Xiaodong suddenly asked Wang Nan if she regretted anything in life. She replied that she did not. However, in a shocking turn of events, Yu Xiaodong's demeanor changed. He touched his wife's hair, kissed her cheek, whispered "die" in her ear, and then pushed her off the cliff. To avoid detection, he checked their surroundings to make sure no one had witnessed the incident. Looking down, he couldn't see where Wang Nan had fallen, and the silence indicated that there were no witnesses below. Yu Xiaodong calmly walked towards the park exit, planning to report the incident after his wife was surely dead. However, hikers who had wandered off the trail spotted Wang Nan's body on the rocks and immediately called for rescue, reporting the incident. As Yu Xiaodong was leaving the reserve, several emergency vehicles sped past him, sirens blaring. Realizing what was happening, he quickly returned to the scene, pretending to be distressed. There, he put on a convincing performance, crying and begging for help. Convinced that his wife was dead and no one would discover the truth, he remained unaware that Wang Nan's fall had been broken by tree branches, which reduced her speed before she landed on bushes and then rolled onto the rocks. This series of events cushioned the impact, saving her life and that of their child, although she suffered severe injuries. Yu Xiaodong was overcome with grief, crying and lamenting the loss of his wife and child. However, his wife suddenly regained consciousness and attempted to speak, but was unable to. The people around her noticed the genuine horror on Yu Xiaodong's face, but he quickly composed himself and leaned in close to his wife. In a hushed tone, he warned her in Chinese to remain silent if she wanted to survive. Wang Nan's injuries were severe, including head trauma, multiple fractures, lacerations, soft tissue contusions, ruptured internal organs, and massive blood loss. Her spine was also severely damaged, leaving doctors concerned that even if she survived, she would likely be paralyzed and never walk again. Wang Nan spent several days in a coma, connected to life support machines, during which time her husband remained by her side constantly. However, despite his devoted appearance, Yu Xiaodong's intentions were sinister. Every time he was alone with his wife, he thought about how to complete the job without arousing suspicion. His actions were a ruse, hiding his true intentions behind a mask of love and devotion that he examined the devices, but couldn't find a way to quietly disable them. Wang Nan slowly regained consciousness. When she did, her husband was beside himself with fear. He stayed with her constantly, terrified that she would reveal the truth to the police at any moment. When they were alone, he threatened her again, saying he had nothing to lose. During the initial police interrogation, the Wang Nan supported her husband's claim that her fall was caused by dizziness. However, when her husband briefly left the room, Wang Nan asked the nurse to call the police again and prevent her husband from re-entering. It was then that she recounted the disturbing story of her fall, alleging that her husband had attempted to kill her. Yu Xiaodong suddenly burst into the room, shouting that his wife was delusional due to her head injury and that he would never harm her or their baby. His explanation was not believable, and he was arrested on the same day. At the hospital, he was charged with multiple crimes, including attempted murder and intimidation after her husband was taken into custody and sent to jail to await trial. Wang Nan finally felt a sense of relief. Although she still had a long and difficult recovery ahead of her, she now felt safe. Wang Nan initially held on to hope that her pregnancy could be saved, despite the severe fall. However, her medical team advised her to terminate the pregnancy due to the large amounts of painkillers and antibiotics she was receiving, as well as the multiple surgeries she underwent under general anesthesia. The doctors prioritized Wang Nan's life, warning her that the fetus was unlikely to survive the strong medications. This news came as a devastating shock to Wang Nan, but she ultimately followed the doctor's advice. During the trial, Yu Xiaodong vehemently denied any wrongdoing, sticking to his claim that the incident was an accident. He remained calm and composed in prison, hiring skilled lawyers and expressing confidence that he would either be acquitted or receive a lenient sentence. In contrast, the investigators and prosecutor were convinced that Yu Xiaodong had deliberately committed the crime. Motivated by the prospect of collecting a substantial insurance payout and inheriting his wife's fortune, which was valued at nearly $2.5 million at the time. During an interrogation, Yu Xiaodong made a shocking revelation about his motive for the heinous crime. He disclosed that he was angry with his wife for not paying off his entire debt, which had accumulated due to his gambling habit. In his mind, if his wife truly loved him, she would have cleared all his debts since she had the financial means to do so. This perceived betrayal led Yu Xiaodong to believe that his wife did not love him, and therefore, he felt justified in punishing her. After making this astonishing confession, the defendant became silent, seemingly aware that he had revealed too much. He attempted to retract his statement, claiming that he had been misunderstood. Nevertheless, his unexpected admission, combined with Wang Nan's testimony, was sufficient to secure a lengthy prison sentence. In March 2021, Yu Xiaodong was found guilty and sentenced to life imprisonment. However, he and his lawyers filed multiple appeals, and 6 months later, the Thai court showed unusual leniency by reducing the life sentence to 10 years in prison. Wang Nan and her family were shocked and outraged by the lenient sentence given to Yu Xiaodong, believing it would set a bad precedent and encourage others to commit similar heinous crimes. Yu Xiaodong received a sentence of 10 years for attempting to murder his pregnant Wang Nan. As of now, Yu Xiaodong is serving her 10-year sentence while Wang Nan is challenging the court's decision. Meanwhile, Yu Xiaodong is filing appeals to prove her innocence. Wang Nan has successfully restarted her business in 2023 and also established an organization that provides support to women who have been affected by domestic violence. She writes about her personal experiences and warnings for women on her blog. Welcome back, detectives. Let's dive into another horrible case. The case of Kaler family. James Craig Kaler was born in Weatherford, Texas in 1963, and his future wife, Karen Kaler, was born in the same city 2 years later. They met in the early 1980s while attending a university in Texas. At the time, Craig was a senior studying engineering, and Karen was a freshman in the humanities department. Despite their different fields of study, they quickly discovered common interests and started a romantic relationship. After graduating, they had a small, intimate wedding with close friends and family. They welcomed their first child, Emily, in 1991, followed by Lauren in 1993. The family lived in a cozy house in Weatherford and enjoyed a comfortable lifestyle, with a higher-than-average income for their area. In 1999, Craig received a lucrative job offer from a major utility company in Weatherford, which coincided with the birth of their son, Sean. Craig adored his son and, with his increased salary, purchased a spacious house in the city's most prestigious neighborhood and a family car. Karen stayed at home to care for their children, and Craig became the primary breadwinner. From the outside, their family appeared to be living a perfect life. Their 3 children have also had many successes in their fields. Emily and Lauren are talented in sports and music. Emily studies at a prestigious pharmacy college and Lauren hopes to attend a conservatory. Sean, on the other hand, showed a keen interest in mathematics and had dreams of becoming an archaeologist. The family's home life seemed idyllic, Craig providing for the family and Karen taking care of the household and raising the children. However, the family was struggling with hidden problems. In 2007, Karen confided in her sister Linda, revealing that she was on the verge of a nervous breakdown due to Craig's controlling behavior. Craig exerted total control over Karen's daily life, demanding a detailed account of every expense, no matter how small, and requiring her to report her whereabouts at all times. The family lives on a strict schedule, with Craig setting their daily routines, including bedtime, wake-up time, meal times. This rigidity makes Karen feel suffocated and trapped. Over time, Craig's need for control grew stronger. He became more demanding and selfish, scheduling Karen's every move. She felt like she had no time left for herself, there was only duty to complete. Karen tried to meet her husband's demands, hoping he would ease up and they could return to their normal life. However, Craig seemed to enjoy exerting control and refused to change. Linda was extremely worried about her sister's confide. Like everyone else, she saw Craig as the ideal husband, father, and family man, only to discover he was a controlling man. Despite this, Karen didn't want to break up her family. Additionally, she and her children relied on Craig financially. So, she decided to find a job that would give her a stable income. She joined a local gym without telling her husband, using it as an escape to clear her mind and work through her emotions. She spent several hours there every day, scheduling her time around her husband Craig's work schedule so he wouldn't notice. Not long after, the gym manager noticed her because of her attractive appearance, excellent fitness, and her hard work. Karen was given the chance to work as a fitness with the possibility of a permanent contract. This was a dream come true for her, as she could now get paid for doing something she loved. However, she was worried about how her husband, Craig, would react when he found out. When Craig found out about Karen's new job, she thought he would be angry and forbid her to continue. Surprisingly, he received this news calmly and even seemed pleased that she had found a way to make money on her own. He had a few conditions. She had to be home when he arrived, cook meals, and not let her new job interfere with their intimate life. Karen found these conditions acceptable, as she now had more freedom and independence. As Karen settled into her new job, she met a new instructor named Sonny Reese, and they quickly became friends. For Karen, who had spent years at home with little social interaction, Sonny became a trusted confidant. The two women spent time together at work, went for walks, had coffee, and shared heartfelt conversations. But little did Karen know, this new friendship would soon lead to unexpected romance and a complicated love triangle. It didn't take long for Karen and Sonny's friendship to evolve into a romantic relationship. At first, they kept their feelings a secret from everyone. However, after some time, Karen decided it was necessary to be honest with her husband, Craig. She spent months preparing for this conversation, searching for the right words and worrying about the potential consequences. Eventually, she confessed to Craig. Craig's reaction to his wife's revelation was surprisingly calm. However, the next day, he made an unexpected condition for accepting Karen's relationship with Sonny, which was that he wanted to be a part of it. Karen was shocked and unsure of how to respond to her husband's talk. Nevertheless, Craig took the initiative and began wooing Sonny, sending her flowers and gifts. He seemed to view this as an opportunity to revitalize his intimate life and bring new passion to his marriage. Initially, Karen and Sonny agreed to Craig's proposal. However, they soon realized that his intentions were aimed at domination. However, their unusual love triangle was short-lived. Craig demanded that Karen end the affair immediately. Despite this, Karen continued to see Sonny, as she had genuinely fallen in love. After almost 20 years of marriage, Karen seemed ready to leave her husband for someone new. This led to a series of secret actions, including moving to another state, scheduling secret meetings. In an attempt to salvage his family, Craig thought it best to relocate to another state. He started job hunting, sending out his resume, and soon secured a role as a water director for a large company in Columbia, Missouri, not far from Kansas. Craig hoped that by moving to a new state, his wife's affair with Sonny would end, and their family life would normalize. However, the summer 2008 move proved challenging for the family, as the kids had to switch schools, make new friends, and adapt to a new city. Although the family was already financially comfortable, Craig's new job nearly doubled his previous salary from Weatherford. Despite his increased responsibilities and work hours, Craig mistakenly believed he had successfully removed Sonny from his wife's life. However, Karen and Sonny continued to communicate regularly through calls, texts, and secret meetings. They would meet halfway, spend a couple of hours in a roadside hotel, and then return home. At this point, Karen realized her marriage was over. She no longer loved Craig, and it was only a matter of time before they divorced. These clandestine meetings persisted until December 2008. At the New Year's Eve celebration that year, the Kaler family went back to their hometown to reconnect with relatives and friends. Sonny was also in attendance at the gathering. Initially, Karen and Sonny kept a low profile, merely exchanging greetings. As the celebration continues and the alcohol slowly affects Karen and Sonny's behavior, they seem to have no regard for social norms. They became inseparable, openly showing affection by holding hands, sharing romantic glances, they even kissed. Craig's anger boiled over into fury after Karen publicly humiliated him by revealing her affair at a party attended by dozens of acquaintances. He lashed out at Karen and Sonny before dragging Karen away from the party. In his rage, Craig lost control and physically assaulted Karen, ripping her dress and slapping her, causing her to fall and hit her head. The incident marked the beginning of the end of their marriage. A few days later, Karen announced she was leaving Craig and initiated divorce proceedings, seeking custody of their children. Initially, Craig attempted to apologize and salvage their relationship for the sake of the children. But Karen was resolute. She said they should divorce, causing Craig to contact friends and family, begging them to convince Karen to reconsider. In the spring of 2009, Craig and Karen's marriage continued to deteriorate. Despite Craig's attempts to salvage their relationship, Karen made it clear she was leaving him for Sonny and she had never been truly happy in their marriage. The tension between them escalated into physical violence, with Craig grabbing Karen during an argument, leaving bruises on her arms. Karen reported the incident to the police, leading to Craig's arrest. After the incident, Karen took the children and moved out without waiting for the divorce to be finalized. Craig was devastated by her departure, and even more so when he discovered that his daughters, Emily and Lauren, were siding with their mother. They told him that they had never seen their mother so happy, which Craig perceived as a betrayal. As a result, he cut off contact with his daughters, only spending time with his son Sean on weekends. Despite the ongoing divorce proceedings, Craig held on to the hope that Karen would change her mind and return to him. His desire to control her led him to engage in jealous behavior, including stalking her and attempting to install a hidden camera in her home. To pursue this, Craig sacrificed his work, initially taking vacation time, then claiming illness, and eventually skipping work altogether without explanation. This reckless behavior resulted in Craig's termination from his job. Without a steady income, he was forced to move in with his parents as he could no longer afford to live on his own. With ample free time, Craig began stalking Karen, prompting her to take him to court to obtain a restraining order. In November 2009, just before Thanksgiving, Karen took her children to visit their 89-year-old grandmother, Dorothy White, in Burlingame, Kansas. On the evening of November 29th, the Burlingame police received a distress call about a suspicious van and reports of gunshots. Dorothy's neighbors reported witnessing a small truck pull up to her house. A man exit the vehicle and enter the house. They claimed to have heard screams and gunshots, but were uncertain. The man then left the house, got back into the truck, and sped away. The neighbors did not attempt to apprehend him, fearing he was armed. When police arrived, they were met by 10-year-old Sean Kaler, who was frantically calling for help. Although Sean was unable to explain what had happened, it was clear that a horrific scene awaited the police. Inside the home, near the front door, Sonny was found lying in a pool of blood but surprisingly still alive despite having 2 gunshot wounds. In the kitchen, police discovered the lifeless body of 44-year-old Karen, who had been shot in the chest and then fatally shot at close range in the head. The body of her oldest daughter, 18-year-old Emily, was found between a wall and a couch. It appeared that Emily had attempted to hide from her enraged father but was caught and killed with 2 point-blank shots. Lauren, found in a pool of blood in the second-floor bedroom, was still alive but weakly called for help and repeatedly said that her father was the one who did it. Dorothy and Lauren were rushed to a nearby hospital's intensive care unit. Despite the doctor's efforts, Lauren died on December 1 due to massive blood loss and internal organ damage. Her great-grandmother passed away a few hours later. Sean, the only surviving witness, was in shock. Psychologists worked with him, but a thorough interrogation was necessary as he was the only living witness to the tragic events at his great-grandmother's house. Sean recounted that evening, stating that his mother was in the kitchen preparing dinner when he approached her to ask for his favorite pie. Suddenly, the back door swung open, and his father entered with a shotgun, pointing it at Karen without a word. He shot her, then moved closer and fired again. Sean was initially frozen in horror. His father then turned to Sean but didn't aim the gun. Instead, Craig stared at Sean silently and intently. Sean realized he had to escape. So he jumped out the open back door. He ran towards the main entrance, hoping to alert his grandmother, sisters, and call for help. However, upon reaching the threshold, he heard several more gunshots. Fearing what he might find inside, Sean hid in a small outbuilding. He heard more gunshots and waited in terror, afraid that his father would come after him. Craig Kaler was immediately added to the wanted list, with a warning that he was armed and extremely dangerous. As police received multiple reports of a speeding truck, they were able to quickly determine the direction the gunman was heading. At one point, Craig abandoned his vehicle in a wooded area and began walking down a deserted road. Law enforcement soon caught up with him and apprehended him the next morning. Upon arrest, police found the rifle and ammunition in the back seat of the abandoned vehicle, along with prescription medication for depression and anxiety disorders near the driver's seat. Craig did not resist arrest and appeared confused and frightened. He admitted to being armed with a gun and a hunting knife, but claimed he did not intend to use them. He also acknowledged that he had done something terrible, which he believed the police already knew about. At the police station, Craig fully confessed to his crimes and opened up to the investigating officer. He shared how his wife had cheated on him with someone named Sonny and how they had humiliated him in front of friends at a New Year's Eve party. He explained how his attempts to save his marriage had cost him his job and what was left of his self-respect. Craig became emotional, stating that he didn't know how he had decided to take such drastic action and felt that everyone, including his daughters, had betrayed him. Craig's trial started in December 2010. Craig, advised by his lawyer Thomas Heaney, retracted his initial confession. He claimed his actions were due to mental illness and insanity, which was his only defense to avoid the death penalty for the murder of 4 people. Heaney argued that Craig was in a fragile mental state following a series of personal setbacks. His wife had left him for someone else, his children sided with their mother, he lost his job, and had to move back in with his parents. According to Heaney, these factors led to a breakdown, and Craig committed the crime while insane, without realizing what he was doing. However, the prosecution found no evidence of insanity or an altered mental state in Craig's actions. They argued that his actions were calculated, as he had purchased guns and ammunition in advance and went to the victim's house knowing his family was there. He shot each victim twice, ensuring no chance of survival, but intentionally spared his son Sean, allowing him to escape. In August 2011, Craig was found guilty on all counts and received a death sentence. At the final hearing, 12-year-old Sean testified, stating that he didn't want his father to die, as he was his only remaining close relative. Despite multiple appeals by Craig and his lawyers, the verdict has remained unchanged. As of today, Craig is still in prison, fighting to have the case reviewed and the death sentence overturned. After the death of his mother and sisters, Sean moved in with his grandmother. Now Sean has grown up and he has completed his studies and chosen to stay and work in his hometown.